Hey, so I'm back. I appreciate GW announcing my return. That was pretty big of them, especially after all those emails I sent about a succession plan for when Chairman James bows out. I propose a Gang of 4 situation. Get these newly idle Horus Heresy writers cooking up some 5-year plans. And speaking of a Gang of 4, this video is about Chaos. Chaos. A cheeky theft from Michael Moorcock has grown into Warhammer's iconic villain, shared across fantasy and 40k, because even demons have to work 2 jobs. The Pantheon is often described as a vast, eldritch manifestation of primal emotions, rather than what it actually is. 4 fail kids squatting on 2/3 of a colour wheel. Yeah, so the whole Lovecraftian horror claim is somewhat undercut by being part of a wargame that insists on rigidly defining their parameters for rules purposes, but you know what, that's fine. We love a good well-differentiated quartet, don't we? You know, where each one gets their own special gimmick and signature style. The Pantheon is like the 4 humours for metalheads, or the big 4 of metal for Potterheads, or the 4 Hogwarts houses but without the, well, with less transphobic baggage, or, oh, I forgot the rule of 3, didn't I? My favourite aspect of Chaos is the Path to Glory, which describes a mortal's gradual embrace of chaos, aka chaos spooning. Whether their journey is motivated by true devotion or a selfish quest for power, likely both, it leads mortals down the road to become powerful champions or grotesque abominations, likely both. This RPG-like concept has been around since the Realm of Chaos books from the 80s, publications which remain unparalleled. Chaos's Path to Glory has its claws in the 2 main ways I engage with Warhammer, a childlike adoration of cool monsters and a more serious interest in anti-heroes. The core of this video will focus on Chaos character arcs and their thematic implications. But before we get into the big ideas, you want to see some big boys? The ultimate culmination of the Path to Glory is Dark Apotheosis, a mortal transforming into a demonic champion. Let's introduce the Chaos Pantheon through some demon princes I created. Khorne, otherwise known as the Blood God or the Lord of Skulls, is the angry god of violence, represented here by a demonic ogre. As leading expert on my own bizarre interpretation of ogres, I've decided that's canon. Can you really say no to that face? The Blood God's interests are pretty simple: axes, skulls, the taking of one with the other, oh, and K and H. That's the letters K and H, not the substances K and H. Those tend to be enjoyed by the followers of his main Pantheon rival, Slaanesh. In the eternal power struggle among the siblings, Khorne is most likely to be ascendant. There's a reason why they were in the very first AOS starter set. Khorne is a pretty reliable bet. Just ask Khrushchev. Tzeentch is the treacherous god of change and magic, whose self-sabotaging schemes have the truest claim to the concept of chaos. The Changer of Ways loves a good reversal of fortune, even when it entails a plan blowing up in their face, which is a refreshingly glass half full approach to world domination. Their least favourite sibling is the ever-stagnant Nurgle, but occasionally the siblings come together for a collaboration, like with Bird Flu. Cause yeah, Tzeentch has a peculiar soft spot for birds. Are birds like especially changey? I feel like they've kept a pretty low profile since that one big change. And so, what's more Tzeentchian than rocking up to the bird army as a cat? Truly, you can spot a Lord of Change, but a Lord can't change. It's... Nurgle is the jolly god of disease, decay, and disgusting life. So here's the most disgusting kind of miniature there is.
Unfinished.
It's been sitting in my shame pile, stagnating in a state between begun and complete, which is thematically appropriate now I think about it. Alright, back into the draw with you. Slaanesh is the god of pleasure and excess, Dionysian hedonism by way of the Cenobites. And yeah, as with Clive Barker, there's a melding of body horror and non-heteronormative gender expression and sexuality, which is, well, it's a lot to unpack. Slaanesh still has my favourite aesthetic though, because I enjoy the concept of a demonic legion being artistically inclined, a fact which makes GW phoning in their last rulebook cover bitterly ironic. Slaanesh is represented here by Syl Sandesk. He traded his demonette companion for some shiny new wings, proving that immortality is no impediment to a midlife crisis. And alright, now we've looked at the big 4, there's one more chaos orientation to consider. Our 5th chaos god is the Great Horned Rat, a recent addition to the Pantheon that... no, fake news. The final manifestation of the Pantheon is Chaos Undivided, represented here by a print I got from 2 Gargoyle Studios. Now, in my opinion, worshipping all 4 makes a lot more sense for a lowly mortal trying to keep their options open than a demonic champion whose custody has to be shared between 4 terrible parents. The lore used to state that after the first Demon Prince, Be'lakor, turned out to be such a nuisance, the entire concept of undivided Demon Princes was scrapped. Now that undivided princes seem not only to be possible but the default option, I'd like them to explore the repercussions of their disparate allegiance further. Like, surely having 4 masters with diametrically opposed goals must tear these beings apart. If you think it through, the undivided demon must have the most erratic slave to the confusing contradictions instead of being vanilla. There's really some way. Yeah. I have way too many demon princes. But you know how it goes. You start with one, and then you don't want to get him lonely, so you get him a friend, and then... At the very least, I hope this proves a certain amount of chaos cred. But despite all the fun stuff, chaos also creates a problematic story element. Each version of Warhammer has a protagonist faction that is, at the very least, morally dubious. The Imperium is a fascist monstrosity, but even Age of Sigmar's domains of order are riddled with the exploitation of feudal and early capitalist modes of production. In response to such political problems, chaos represents a primal aesthetic reaction. And yes, the aestheticization of politics isn't unfamiliar ground, but I'm not really interested in saying chaos is fascism. It doesn't have to be fascism to still be an evil and politically empty sublimation of genuine revolution. So, if the only real challenge to the status quo is batshit false consciousness, the authority of the system is implicitly justified. It's the lesser evil. And yes, 40k has one notable knobbly non-adherent, but you'll have to watch the satire video for my take on them. And this is my worry with chaos, a sort of thematic mirror to the 40k Imperium's satirical contradiction, but on the fantasy side too. And you can't just fix it by bringing out battle-tome Jacobins. It's rather unimaginative to assume high fantasy would have the exact same political movements as real history. The key is to explore the kinds of class struggle that would exist in such a setting, and how it could be subsumed and co-opted into chaos worship. Later on, we'll explore a story that does this rather well. In any discussion of the Chaos Pantheon's Big Four, it's generally agreed that Khorne is the shallowest. Violence is so simplistic compared to concepts like change, stagnation, and pleasure. Even Khorne's demons are basically just the default pop culture devil that the other three aesthetically subvert. But despite Khorne's simple focus, and maybe even because of it, some of Warhammer's most interesting depictions of chaos focus on Khorne. Here's a brief example. Call of Archaon is a now mostly forgotten collection of shorts about champions competing to become Varangard. The Nurgle and Tzeentch champions are the expected archetypes, but Guy Haley's Khornate sections are more lively. Ushkar Mir once led his people's defense against chaos, but was forced to bend the knee to Korghos Khul. However, Mir only serves Khorne in order to one day take revenge for the destruction of his people. Turns out, his long-term goal makes him more similar to Archaon than he knows. Khorne is well aware of Mir's delusional scheme to kill him, and mocks him by stealing his voice. Mir's arc culminates when drinking from a cursed oasis sends him back in time to meet his younger self at the moment of his city's destruction. The justification for turning to chaos doesn't convince his younger self. He won't be swayed by some current Mir argument. And so young Mir decides to reject the corrupt pact. When they fight, lightning snatches the soul of the uncorrupted Mir to be reforged. I am not saying it's high art, but even in an anthology from the notoriously rocky first year of AOS, a Khorne story provides a vehicle for some thematic and psychological exploration. I think Khorne's surprising story hit rate is partly an expectations thing. The other three Chaos Gods have potential for philosophically deep themes, so in comparison, Khorne comes off as the bratty beheading bureaucrats.
I'm slavering, Pigman. 50 skulls, that's a lot of skulls.
But all that potential still needs to be accessed by a writer interested in exploring such themes. So stories featuring the other three often feel like missed opportunities. The mixed results of Slaanesh stories could fill a whole other script, but suffice to say that while authors usually avoid the "it's all sex" cliche, there are more notes they could be playing. Actually, Tzeentch tales also fared poorly. Dogged ambition to acquire esoteric knowledge just becomes drudgery after a while. Just ask anyone doing a PhD. And while Nurgle's track record is better, thanks to Josh Reynolds making the Order of the Fly the best antagonists of early AOS, it's Khorne corruption stories that seem to exhibit the best writing. Khorne's key advantage relates back to the problem of chaos as false consciousness. Chaos corrupts genuine revolution, but that doesn't invalidate the underlying hatred of the social system. And this is the accessibility that authors recognize in Khorne. It all starts from rage. Each of the 4 has some kind of relatable emotional hook, but rage is the easiest to communicate narratively because it's premised on opposition to something external. So, Khorne can represent rage against injustice, even and including the injustice of Khorne, an arbitrary contradiction summed up in the mantra, "Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows." This paradox explains why well-written Khorne characters are comparatively frequent. Contradiction is the cornerstone of an interesting character, and many Khorne stories riff on the tragedy of becoming the thing you hate. Authors being able to access a compelling reason for turning to chaos is essential to the coherence of the setting. We can suspend our disbelief about magic, demons and all that, but we still need some emotional grounding to make sense of why people do it. In this video, I'll look at Khorne stories which bridge this gap and make the fall to chaos thematically interesting and emotionally convincing, perhaps even relatable. But before we go there, I want to spend a few minutes on the philosophy of violence. On the face of it, hatred and violence are negative parts of the human condition. But is that so?
Hate is inevitable for many of us, and that it is really unhelpful to pathologize inevitable emotions. And what for me has been a very radicalizing force is a kind of growing and glowing hatred for this system.
Many ideologies, like liberalism, are uncomfortable with the idea of hatred, though comfortable with violence so long as it has the guise of institutional legitimacy. But I'm more interested in violence without that legal legitimacy, the raging violence of ordinary people against an unjust system. It seems intuitive to me that the degree to which this is ethically justifiable is related to the degree of power asymmetry, and so one of the most important explorations of violence's political utility is written about decolonization. In his landmark collection of essays, The Wretched of the Earth, psychiatrist and revolutionary Frantz Fanon argues that decolonization is inevitably violent. Violence is inscribed within the structures of colonialism, both in an overt sense and in the ideological superstructure that casts the native as inferior. This Manichaean worldview is, of course, a lie, and the road to revolution requires a violent confrontation with this lie. In the colonial context, there is no truthful behaviour, and good is quite simply what hurts them the most. And yeah, that might incense a liberal who idolises peaceful resistance, but violence is often the only recourse left. And then there's a way that mythologised versions of past resistance movements get cynically used to denounce contemporary struggles. To briefly allude to today's most fraught colonial battleground, supporters of Israel have often decried the lack of a Palestinian Gandhi, while the state routinely engaged in brutal crackdowns on peaceful demonstration. Alright, I'm gonna have to be careful with real world analogies in a video about Warhammer, even when they are actively implied by the authors. I don't want to risk trivialising the brutality of colonialism. And this is gonna be hard for me because everyone knows I love analogies. Well, except without the OGs. You know, apples and oranges, like a needle in the haystack. I feel like the OG analogies have gotten worn out, like my bum after and that's an analogy. Anyway, the point is, we're going to look at some Warhammer stories which are explicitly exploring colonial themes, so the historical comparisons are not only appropriate, but essential. Moreover, I need to underscore the point that the factions doing the colonialism in Warhammer 40k or AOS represent the lesser evil compared to the demonic hordes, and this is really not the case in reality. It's inarguable that colonialism has been the bloodiest process in human history. The settlement of the Americas entailed the extermination of 90% of its native population, some 50 million people, a loss so great it actually led to global climate cooling. And purely extractive colonialism has been equally brutal. Historians have found that 40 years of British rule in India resulted in 165 million excess deaths, exceeding both world wars combined. World War II analogies can sometimes seem cheap, given the unique place it has in the West's memory. But look, what made the crimes of the Nazis so unique was that they did settler colonialism in Europe. Lebensraum and Manifest Destiny were the same thing. To quote Matt Christman by way of Tim Heidecker about colonial ideology.
It's free real estate.
So yeah, when I start talking about Sigmarite settlements and AOS, I want you to remember it's a sanitized version of the real thing. But since we're going to be looking at the arcs of individual characters, let's bring this stuff to a personal level. Being a trained psychiatrist, Fanon was interested in the psychological effects a violent struggle has on a populace. Part of the equation is, well, a lot of trauma, but violence also helps the colonized subject shed their feelings of inferiority and powerlessness, and this collective experience of power, of agency, means that the revolution is harder to subsume into a single great figure. When they have used violence to achieve national liberation, the masses allow nobody to come forward as a liberator. This aspect of the dynamic is, of course, inherently in tension with the way stories usually have a main character, unless you're prone to the flights of Eisenstein, in which case the entire proletariat is your protagonist. That's not to say that having a lead automatically undermines this sort of story. I've been using moments from Battle of Algiers, a masterful depiction of Algeria's liberation struggle, a struggle Fanon himself participated in, and the movie still has a clear protagonist. But it's worth being aware of this tension, because as we start looking at stories of chaos corrupting liberation struggles, there's going to be places where the real world analogies break down. For example, Fanon shows us ways in which myths and folklore allow the colonized an escape from mental control, but obviously I wouldn't compare chaos worship to indigenous traditions. Aside from being offensive, that analogy doesn't work because chaos as it exists in Warhammer has less in common with faith or spirituality, rather it's an objective, external power that demands ideological commitments. Okay, that's enough groundwork for now. The rest of this video will be looking at how these themes of violence and decolonization are represented in Khorne corruption stories. Does the subsumption of genuine revolution into chaos enslavement end up endorsing colonialism as the lesser evil? Or does it, not do that? Well, let's find out. What's the story, Morning Glory? Even if Black Library is often trashy, any novel automatically has more artistic merit than the dry, fake history you find in codexes and battle tomes. Yeah, I'm suggesting you read Khornography for the story. And by the standards of Warhammer, the books I'm looking at in this video are actually quite good. This is doubly handy. Not only will I have stuff to talk about, but I won't make the authors feel bad if they stumble on this video. Like, I'm not expecting this to blow up, but then when I last wrote a snarky letterboxd review, I wasn't expecting the director to leave a comment. Anyway, it's time to answer our question. Who has the best chaos corruption story in Warhammer? Let's get to our candidates. In a series which often feels like advent calendar filled with Ryvita and sawdust, Aaron Dembski-Bowden's Betrayer is a welcome dose of high fructose corn syrup. Horus's war is in full swing, and this story focuses on a rampage undertaken by two traitor legions who couldn't be more philosophically different, even if the names are confusingly similar. Who would win, the World Errors or the Wood Beaters? The novel has a strong ensemble cast, but I'm going to focus on Angron, who gets the key corruption of the book. His arc reaches back to an early life as a gladiator on New Syria, where he led a slave revolt against the planet's high lords, only to be plucked away from the final battle by the Emperor of Mankind, Spartacus by way of the Spartacists. Angron was ordered to join the Great Crusade at the head of the World Eaters, who he correctly judges a poor replacement for his gladiator comrades. The novel's climax sees them return to New Syria, and we get some good emotional beats as he succumbs to demonhood. However, we are looking for a fall to chaos that is intertwined with an anti-colonial struggle. Angron's failed uprising is tragic, and it informs his antipathy towards the Imperium, but it's not an ongoing project. It's backstory. This is a Rosebud moment, not a Rosabud moment. But there are other issues with his arc, such as the use of that common genre trope, the agency-erasing artifact. When a writer is struggling to portray a believable fall to darkness, they can bridge that gap with some sort of magical MacGuffin. Angron's butcher's nails implants are more interesting than the standard issue evil swords that other Primarchs get, but they function similarly in impairing his lucidity at important decision points. Between this and the machinations of the Wordbearers, the deck is utterly stacked against the World Eaters, and Angron's demonic transformation is an expression of his brother Lorgar's agency rather than his own. Aside from the curtailment of agency, the relatability of Betrayer's chaos arcs are hamstrung by the focus the entire setting has on genetic superhumans. It's not Bowden's fault, but the fantasy side gets a much more satisfying version of the path to glory. And so, while Betrayer is one of my favourite Horus Heresy novels, it lacks the themes I'm particularly interested in. A character waging a genuine struggle against injustice, and B, an active and emotionally convincing decision to submit to chaos. It won't surprise you then that for a more relatable perspective on chaos, we're shelving Space Marines and moving on to Age of Sigmar. Or maybe it will. A common criticism you see from many people, and also gamers, is that Age of Sigmar lacks a grounded human point of view. If you'll let me briefly bust some baseless bullshit. Sure, it was once a pretty valid criticism of the minis. It took ages for the Cities of Sigmar refresh to come out, but AOS authors have long dramatised the weirdness of the setting through an ordinary human context. You tell anyone tricked by a misleading cover who thought they were getting the intimate perspective of Olinda, or Kragnos, or Skragrott, or Andrasta, or Nagash, or whatever, that AOS lacks a human point of view. When people say that, what they really mean is they haven't watched a YouTube video that spoon feeds facts from the wiki. Well, settle in for some chaos spooning. Our next book is Gav Thorpe's The Red Feast, which gives us the origin of AOS's premier pyramid perfectionist, its debut villain, Khorgus Khul. Like with the Horus Heresy novel, this story is a prequel to the current status quo, taking place right before the Age of Chaos. Since no one understands just how bad the Dark Gods are, there's a tone of impending doom, reminiscent of the Star Wars prequels or my first year of uni. The Khul tribe's ancient forge is actually powered by Khorne blood magic, so it feels like the Chaos powers are in that butt-wiggling stage of a cat about to pounce. Is it Khul or Khul? Don't come to this channel expecting consistency. But yeah, the Khul are, well, were, a proud Axian tribe. It isn't just a name Khorgus picked out for the extra K, and Khorgus isn't even originally what he's called. He has to earn that alliterative glow-up. We meet Athel, a warrior at the centre of the Khul tribe's tense alliance with the Iridians. Athel serves the Iridian court as spear carrier in trials by combat. Imagine if Oberyn Martell was on Gregor Clegane's stack. Athel's fears about the Khul position as junior partner explode when he invokes hostilities with powerful Tzeentchian slavers the Iridians were attempting to appease. As Athel embarks on a search for allies against them, prophetic dreams lead him into the wilderness where, also like Oberyn Martell, an evil mountain blows his mind. Unlike Angron's story, the impending threat of slavery is Athel's direct motivation to seek extracurricular power. Even before the stakes get raised, Thorpe does a great job at establishing Athel's anxieties about the precarity of the Iridian alliance. A generation of peaceful prosperity has diminished the Khul's ruthless reputation, so both sides are bombarding Athel with these sorts of posts. Actually, this whole reject pre-modernity, return to tradition theme is repeated in second viewpoint character Threx of the Skullbrands, who fights for a return to the tribal traditions implied by the name Skullbrand. So, we've got Chaos offering a way of alleviating vulnerability. Not personal vulnerability, since Athel never loses a fight, but the vulnerability of his people. I like how, once Athel accepts Khorne, he becomes more dangerous, but not because of demonic superpowers. Khorne's gift is to simply remove his reluctance to kill. Overall, it seems we're closer to the themes I was looking for. Athel makes the decision to serve Khorne because he wishes to protect his people.
Atoll protected, atoll protected.
I also want to mention that Thorpe creates a vibrant sense of place. The Red Feast is just as much an origin story for Akshi's Great Parch as it is for Khul. AOS authors seem to relish the chance to add details to the map, because, come on, show me a fantasy writer who isn't more interested in world building than story structure. This genre began when a linguist used some magic jewellery to trick people into reading his tree poems. Now, with all that said, I have some issues with the story's pacing. It really is a Horus Heresy novel. Within 2 brisk chapters of Athel finding the Skull Mountain, he's completed basic Chaos orientation, signed the contract, and replaced his name with some crisp new consonants. With that, all the cards are on the table. He's Khorne's champion, and the third act breaks into a sprint with no respite. What we have here is a failure to
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
What we have here is a character arc that feels abrupt. Which begs the question, what am I looking for in an arc anyway? To me, a convincing arc means A. Psychological and/or philosophical change. B. Caused by a character's experiences and decisions. C. Which we can recognise as being part of the same continuous person. It's a subjective complaint, but I find it hard to reconcile the sudden difference between our upstanding protagonist and this new Khorgus guy. It's funny, this is where another story might deploy an agency-erasing artifact to make the change more palatable. I respect the fact Thorpe doesn't do this, keeping the agency squarely in the protagonist's hands. I think the arc would have benefited from more hesitation, doubts. With Khul, there is no refusal of the fall to chaos. You see this in the perfunctory way Thorpe deals with Athel's family bond. He's just got more important things to worry about, so he puts them out of his mind. And look, I can read the book 1 subtitle. Thorpe was clearly planning a sequel where Corvus returns home to be confronted by his decision. I expect the fact his wife and kid have never been mentioned anywhere but this novel bodes very well for this reunion. I'm sure they contentedly receive his monthly skull stipend to this day. Since we never got a follow-up, it feels unfair to compare an orphaned prologue to Betrayer, which benefits from drawing on dozens of previous installments. But it's been an illuminating example. Athel's rational and compassionate personality a significant departure from Angron and his supporting cast. The first 2/3 of the plot build some solid tension, and we do get some exploration of chaos intertwining with the liberation struggle. Even if I'm not going to go any further with the Red Feast, it makes a lot of sense to stick with AOS for this video. Yeah, we get it, Stir, you prefer the setting. Well, the broader scope of chaos progression is one of the reasons why. You can go and read a story for whichever rung of the chaos hierarchy you're interested in, be it the struggling gig economy delivery rider, aspiring girl boss who just bought into another MLM, or Gilet in July, coke on the Amex finance cunt. And as I was making this video, they announced another story about a tribal leader trying to protect his people while being tempted by the gods. With a miniature tie-in as well. Let's hope that book turns out better than The Hollow King. Now, like the exploits of the notorious Oxocube Bandit of Highbury, let's take stock. So far, we've looked at 3 Khorne stories, each with their own merits, though none completely addressing the themes I outlined in the introduction. I guess I'm looking for a book that combines the positive qualities of all 3. I want the fantastical boldness of Call of Archaon, without the unevenness of an anthology. The interesting power dynamics of the Red Feast, but with a more convincing character arc. The dramatic highs of Betrayer, but with a more sophisticated exploration of colonialism. Okay, anything else? How about a Final Fantasy character on the cover? Godeater's Son by Noah Van Wyn is the reason I decided to make this video. We get the best of both realms, a nuanced character arc that benefits from being told in intimate first person, as well as a story with compelling political dynamics. The consideration when put into the material relations of the world really shows. We're still on Akshi's Great Parch, but many generations after the Red Feast. If you need a brief timeline reminder, Athel is getting his name rebrand around here, right before 5 centuries of Chaos Ascendancy. Thanks a lot, mate. Very cool. Godeater's Son is well into the Age of Sigmar, as pockets of the realms are being reclaimed from the dominion of the Dark Gods. Our story takes place on the Pale of Bodshi, an arid desert, once home to the great Erden kingdoms of Cardand and Barat, and many thriving tribes besides. Those nations were destroyed by chaos, and now the Pale has been reclaimed by Sigmarite settlers, renaming the city Candip and pushing its natives into precarity. Heldenarr Falls and his sister Vari are testament to this. After their family was killed by Beastkin, they've led lives of graft and poverty. For a time they served in Candip's free guilds, but now eke out a living in the Ashwilds, foraging for Lavamander dung and selling it to Caradron merchants.
So what do you do? I sell shit.
In return for the coal-like substance bound for the braziers of aristocrats, the merchants hand them meagre vials of Aqua Garanis, or Aquag, magical healing waters that are used as currency. If you suspect they're getting fleeced by the traders, you're familiar with the mechanics of unequal exchange. Thing is, the Fall siblings have a very different view of Azerite rule. Hardship has only strengthened Vari's faith in Sigmar. She takes after their mother, who stood bravely against the beastkin that orphaned the siblings with nothing but a frying pan, and was taken by lightning. And if you suspect that's a setup for a later reveal, you're familiar with AOS story tropes. Heldenarr Falls is more cynical, having served in an Ashstalker, that is, native-only free guild battalion, and experienced Azerite racism firsthand. Since then, he's come to view all Sigmarite settlers as Azerites, whether or not they originate from the realm of heavens. They're squatting on the Erden heritage either way. His feelings are those of the colonized subject. His resentment is underpinned by an envy he dare not acknowledge. He loves his sister, the only family he has left, but he does not share her values. And let's talk a little about the Erden culture. It's clear that Noah took inspiration from the Middle East and Central Asia, a classic bit of cultural pastiche, otherwise known as getting your Herbert on. The Erden follow a code of behavior named Urduval, and its main pillars of sanctuary, hospitality, and vengeance, and maybe a secret fourth pillar everyone forgot, has similarities with Pashtun Wali, the traditional lifestyle of the Pashtun. Without wishing to overstate the analogy, Afghanistan casts shadows on this story, an ethnically diverse region with a long history of battling against imperial domination. It's appropriate, if certainly coincidental, that the term to describe the rivalries between the Chaos Gods, the Great Game, is the same as the one used for the 19th century imperial jostle over Afghanistan. Wow, aren't I pretentious and reading way too much into things? Late into the editing process, I stumbled onto a podcast where Noah says this.
I previously served in the Marine Corps, and so I'd previously been on a deployment in Afghanistan. And so I tried to kind of draw upon those experiences, right? For the novel, where obviously Sigmar's armies, as far as Heldenarr is concerned, they're foreign occupiers. And while this wasn't universally the case with Afghans, there were definitely locals that you'd interact with, and you get a very clear impression, these people do not like me, they do not want me here. And they had every right to feel that way. He captured a lot of the rage of someone who's been, who's seen foreign soldiers in his homeland.
For fuck's sake, why do I only find these things after the video is nearly done? So yeah, unlike that urban myth about Rambo 3, this book actually is dedicated to the brave Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan. Well, not really, but you get what I mean. Noah is drawing an analogy between Sigmarite and American occupation, creating violent resistance. Of course, I think me and Noah can agree the analogy breaks down because Sigmar didn't literally create chaos, whereas Islamic fundamentalism in the Middle East can be mostly blamed on the US covertly funding and supporting it against communism. Reality is grim-darker than fiction. Tempting as it is to elaborate, I'll just recommend Unholy Wars by John K. Cooley and Season 4 of the Blowback podcast for more details on that. Oh, and one last thing. No one is allowed to complain if I make historical comparisons, since Noah drew Rambo 3. Since Noah drew First Blood. Anyway, the story proper begins when Full rescues a priestess from some desert raiders, in accordance with Urduval traditions of sanctuary and hospitality, and also because he doesn't want to disappoint Vari. Unfortunately, this sister Eleni turns out to be an embodiment of all his worst preconceptions of Sigmarites. Full is quite happy to ignore the Urduval sanctuary principle in this case, and the rescue turns sour.
I shall wait here. Bring water when you can. You know these lands? Look at you. Of course you do. So, what are you waiting for? Go on! I peered at the ridgeline. Part of me had hoped Vari would see all this. I had saved this woman for my sister, not for charity. You're not going to help. I pointed to the wasteland horizon. That way lies the burning valley, Cardand, and within it, Candip. I hawked, spat. Your city. She grew flustered. I need help, not waypoints. I did help. You animal! You're an Ashfoot, aren't you? A Paler, an Irden native, charging extra for those who speak Sigmar's tongue after all we did for you? Ashfoot. My shoulders tensed, but I walked on. Perhaps I need not share the events of this day with Vari. We raised aqueducts in Candip, the priestess said. We walled your city. Our armies patrol its reaches. You'd be geists but for us. You'd be thralls to the dark gods. This is how you repay us? I stopped and turned. You did nothing when the beasts came for my family. Nothing when me and my sister were alone, except hire us to fight your wars. I don't repay nothing. Civilizing the reclaimed is not nothing. I marched onwards. Hail Sigmar.
However, Vari catches Full red-handed before he can abandon Eleni, so now we're stuck with her. Since they've missed the rendezvous with their Caradron contact, the siblings will have to shepherd Eleni back to Candip on foot, which will be like playing a really long escort mission while on the phone with your racist auntie. Vari treats Eleni with a deference and respect that's not reciprocated, which drives Full up the wall. Despite Full having killed the raiders to save her, Eleni explains they'll have to pay costly censors, think indulgences, to the Sigmarite Church to expunge these sins. Yes, you get fined if you do a heroic rescue without a proper license. Can you tell Warhammer is British? As a member of the clergy, Eleni plays an important role in enforcing the ideological hegemony. The reclaimed might go to the temple on proper days, she says, speak the prayers, but their traitorous hearts are difficult to change. This idea of the native as inherently predisposed to moral darkness is exactly what Fanon describes about colonial ideology. The native is not only the absence of values, but the negation of values. A corrosive element, the depository of maleficent powers. The only difference between real colonial attitudes and the ones in Warhammer is that maleficent power is meant literally. But let's zero in on that term, colonialism. It's something that Bowden and Thorpe touch on in their respective books. Well, vaguely. It's more of a generalised disapproval without especially specific criticisms, like my teachers on Parents' Evening. Godeater's son, on the other hand, knows exactly what it has to say, like my parents in the car ride afterwards. A convincing representation of colonialism must have the ideological dimension, the superstructure, as well as the base, the extractive economic system. A problem with, let's call them, less politically aware writers, is that they're so excited to invent brand new slurs for fantasy creatures they forget about the underlying economic relation. You know, the thing that the slurs are there to ideologically reinforce. Yeah, I know, it's been a long time since that movie came out, but as they say, hatred is a bright that never dims. With Godeater's son, we get our bespoke slur, Ashfoot, but Noah also roots the ideological stuff in coherent class conflict, specifically that of early capitalism. And yeah, that's not a mode of production we associate with high fantasy, but why not? This idea comes from conflating capitalism with industrialization. Yet, as Ellen Wood points out in her fantastic book, capitalism is a set of social relations which long precede the steam engine. And neither is it a natural expression of the tendency towards commerce, which has existed in different forms throughout history. The so-called commercialization model. Capitalism developed in the English countryside, where the replacement of the traditional peasantry with tenant farmers through land privatization gave their lords the opportunity to use economic coercion instead of, well, the older kind of coercion. And then competitive laws of motion turned this opportunity into an imperative. Okay, that's enough about agrarian capitalism. I don't want to balloon the runtime of this video even more. After their conquest of Bodshi, the Azerite settlers began the process of primitive accumulation, the enclosure of land formerly held in common by the Erden and other native peoples. The landless are thus driven into wage labour on estates or in Candip city, unless they attempt to circumvent these imposed property relations, becoming a criminalised lumpen proletariat. A lot of this stuff is just applying a materialist logic to structures already established in the law for the cities of Sigmar. Actually, Candip is technically independent of Sigmar's official domain, which may have been a Black Library mandate to distance the protagonists of their second most popular setting from the brutality of colonialism. They already have their most popular setting for that. Mind you, this independence allows for rivalries between different factions of the ruling class. So, whether it was Noah's own choice, or GW threatening to throw him in the pit they say for writers with too many good ideas, it serves the story. I realise I'm spending a lot of time on the preamble, but it's important to clarify the core themes of the story. The last important facet is something which comes up when Full begs Eleni to cancel the censors.
Once, we knew what happened when our mortal coils unspooled, but those days are over. Sometimes cursed realms take the dead, realms of many hells and dark gods, worse than sinners' nightmares. More often, the great necromancer seizes their souls as his tithe, a fate no better than the first. Protecting the spirits of the faithful from these forces takes effort. Effort requires currency.
This is part of what distinguishes Age of Sigmar from the Old World or 40k. Mortals are not just aware of the objective existence of gods, demigods and flemigods, they understand with complete certainty that their faith, that is their allegiance, will decide the destination of their immortal souls. An afterlife isn't a matter of speculation. You can literally hop through a realm gate to Shyish and visit your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. But no, you're always too busy. All that means faith in the realms can become a bit transactional. Call it cynicism or a healthy instinct for metaphysical self-preservation. But it is what it is. Either Sigmar, Nagash or the Chaos Gods will get their due. We can call this the soul debt of mortality for short. The mere fact of existence saddles mortals with a debt that will someday be called in. Souls are currency to the gods, and like with capitalism, there's a tendency towards monopoly. This tug of war gets explored in the Josh Reynolds novels Nagash, Undying King and Soul Wars, where the gods fighting for the custody of souls is like Cosmic Kramer versus Kramer. No, back to the pit with you, Josh. Your picture's too good, your swag too different, they'll kill you. The irrefutable existence of Warhammer's gods means belief is as much a matter of political ideology as faith. This makes Vari's non-transactional faith in Sigmar a little quaint in Fool's eyes, though he doesn't fault her for seeking solace. They each have a way of coping with the miseries they've endured, and if Vari does it through spiritual belief, Helden copes another way, with a hatred for the divine that is deeper than oceans. Obviously, Fool isn't like an atheist. It's not as if he's become disillusioned by Neil deGrasse Tyson documentaries.
The universe is expanding.
The universe is expanding?
Well, the universe is everything, and if it's expanding, someday it will break apart, and that will be the end of everything.
What is that your business? He stopped doing his homework.
What's the point?
Fool's resentment stems from a desire for agency, something he believes the gods and Azerite oppressors have taken from him. Life has been hard for the siblings, bouncing from one injustice to another, and Fool prickles against this helplessness. He dwells on the failure of his parents' ideal of freedom. Freedom requires control, and control requires a will to power. He realizes that gods make mortals into slaves, both in the literal metaphysical sense we touched on, but also through religious doctrine. Wait, will to power and rejecting slave morality? Fool's a proper little Nietzschean, isn't he? Well, probably not so keen on Stormcast Eternal Recurrence, I expect. He's a man of deep anger, though he also upholds the Erden tradition of resisting Akshi's fiery temperament, mastering one's passions with a heart of ice. All of this adds up to an interesting cocktail, a man ruled by anger while affecting coolness, someone who nurses revolutionary ideals that are motivated by spite, the opposite in every way of his beloved benevolent bootlicker of a sister. And now, as we kick the plot into higher gear, I hope you're asking yourself how someone so obsessed with agency could ever become a slave to darkness. I'm very grateful to the 3 or 4 of you that have stuck with me through all these digressions, though I'd take one last opportunity to recommend actually reading the book. Noah did a good job. Anyway, the siblings take Eleni back to their dwelling, but not without another altercation which has them drawing weapons, forcing Vari to intervene. Vari's love for her brother is severely overtaxed, so Fool slinks off, stewing in shame about losing his cool. Eleni takes advantage of their hospitality by, relieving herself in their garden. God, it never ends with her. And if you're thinking, this holy roller could do with rolling over, then careful what you wish for, cause the Fool residence gets considerably less inviting when it's attacked by beastkin. Man, it's one disrespectful guest after another. It's like the popular saying goes, if you're out of frying pans, you go in the fire. The beasts throw them in a crowded pen to be used later as sacrifices, and they soon experience the passing of Orb Infernia, Akshi's blood moon, its strange gravity, dragging captives into the sky to be slaughtered by the moon's demons. This is Helden's first experience with the horror of chaos, but it's Vari's last. Unable to fight the moon's pull, he watches as his sister is snatched into the sky, like a twisted parody of Sigmar's lightning taking their mother. I bet Helden wishes he had held on. No. You don't get to judge me for that. Not when we have this exchange earlier. Noah drew first blood on Godeater's pun. Okay, enough of me undermining the tone, because I was emotionally invested at this point. After losing Vari, Fool is just broken, and it's at this moment that the ever-tactful priestess asks for some water. With the demonic influence of the blood moon ringing in his mind, Fool decides to follow the letter, if not the spirit, of Erdoval hospitality.
Enough? She nodded, grateful. I seized her arm. It's not enough. Eleni made to ask what I meant, but before she could, I crammed a fistful of coagulated gore into her mouth. Drink! Hospitality was a pillar in Erdoval, so I would be hospitable. She had saved my soul.
So yeah, losing Vari makes him go a bit carry. After making her eat dirt, Fool throws Eleni out of the pen onto the rocks below, where she'd been. A brawl breaks out when the remaining survivors see Fool murder the priestess. He kills them too. Better to all die now than be the beast's livestock. Now, how about we leave our anti-hero to his deranged rampage? This sort of sequence is how many corruption arcs culminate, as seen in Horus Heresy novels Betrayer and Fulgrim. So let's take a moment to do an anatomy of a Fool. The character experiences a moment of acute suffering that pushes their sanity to breaking point. For Angron, it's being lost in traumatic despair as he battles Gulliman.
Gooey Lyman.
For Fulgrim, it's grief at having killed Ferris. In addition to this emotional climax, some external influence erases their agency to nudge them over the edge. For Angron, it's Lorgar's warp manipulations, maybe with some butcher's nail sprinkles. For Fulgrim, it's the demonic sword controlling his body during the duel and then taking advantage of his shock and grief. And there you have it, the character is officially chaosified. This fixation on a heightened moment makes sense when many of these characters start out with a 3-paragraph biography in a rulebook, which is why Archaon also has a big tragic moment that sends him to darkness. Both of these Primarchs get solid character arcs. In Fulgrim's case, it's what redeems an otherwise inconsistent book. Are they relatable though? Sure, Fulgrim destroying his brother is tragic, but there aren't many who would find that situation deeply relatable. Basically just Prince William and Harry. But that's cheating. The series is already about a decrepit empire, propped up by a malfunctioning genetic dynasty. So why do the arcs of Angron and Fulgrim lack an accessible resonance? It's partly due to them being inhuman beings under the influence of agency-erasing artifacts, but on a deeper level, putting it all on one moment of distress cheats us of a longer, gradual process of persuasion, and this seems to be an issue Noah is well aware of.
Any kind of chaos faction was always something that I could never really kind of get my hands around. I could never really understand who would join these guys. Who looks at that and says, I want to do that, you know?
I think the most engaging character transformations are made up of many smaller moments, each one giving the reader an opportunity to evaluate the character's decisions. All this is to say that in a less ambitious book, Full's rampage would be the moment he seals the deal. However, unlike the Primarchs or Athol's fall to cool, Full refuses the cool. And yes, we're still in the early chapters, right about where you would expect the refusal of the call to occur. Still, it's notable that a moment similar to the ends of Angron and Fulgrim's arcs is instead the inciting incident. Full's grief and rage is every bit as acute as theirs, and it's even bolstered by some extracurricular demonic influence, yet he doesn't surrender to the gods. The book has already announced itself as a Chaos origin story with the cover, but here shows us we aren't simply waiting for one big moment of suffering plus loss of agency. Full's final fall won't be fraud or a fall. He'll face his fate, on his feet and in full. Yo, that's far. Full's psychotic rampage is interrupted when 3 guilders from Candip come to liberate the camp. The timing is a little late for everyone but Full, who, in the preceding moments, rendered them all, well, late. Full is taken to speak with the leader of the expedition, Leland Saroy, regent of Candip and also the sister of our soil-slurping priestess. Since they're sisters, I can reuse the character portrait with slight modification. No, it's not laziness. Think of how Alec Guinness plays every Gascoigne sibling in Kind Hearts and Coronets. Now I'm wishing this book suddenly switched gears and became Full killing off an aristocratic family one by one to claim their inheritance. Look, I'm just saying there's gold to be made in Kind Hearts and Coronets. Saroy throws Full some aquag for his trouble, unaware of course that he killed her sister less than an hour ago. Full, though, has no interest in being bought off. He pleads the lady to fund a company of Ashstalkers to hunt the beasts that have killed both of their sisters. Well, that's his story, anyway. And this gives him an introduction to the conflicts among the ruling class. Saroy's stingy reluctance to pay for an entire battalion is mocked by Stormcast Ildred Stormsworn, who represents Hammerhall in negotiations to officially fold Candip into Sigmar's domain. Saroy's greed has soured the relationship, while Ildred's intransigence has earned her the nickname The Refuser. Oh, very clever. I suppose it's a coincidence that refuse also means poo. Say what you will about Chaos, but they have a much more active human resources department. You'd never get away with calling a coworker shithead unless you're in a Nurgle army, although in that case it might come off as inappropriate flirtation. Thus, Full's request is at an impasse, with the Refuser refusing to deploy Stormcast against a few errant Gors, while Saroy is beholden to her financial interests. The tail aquagging the dog, if you will. But as Full continues to argue, Saroy shows herself to be the smooth-talking mirror of her sister.
Here's the truth. We could raise your company. I have the waters for it. But not a soul in Candip is comfortable with the idea of your folk under arms. We were at war, you know. War leaves scars. Many still consider you our heathen enemies, no matter how much time passes or how many of you the missionaries reclaim.
Even after experiencing its seductive song of bloodlust, Fall still considers Chaos the great enemy, one he can even justify working with Azerites to destroy. And yet, any beast-busting plans are panned. His audience with Soroy and the Refuser has put him in a dark mood, only deepening when he discovers that a Candip soldier stole his Aquag payout. Wandering back to his dwelling, Fall's mind throbs with the memories of his lost family. As he broods though, a more recent recollection bubbles to the surface. He thinks about the bailiff's cages at the Free Guilder camp, filled with impoverished natives awaiting Sigmar's justice. These prisoners, not the Azerites, are his true kin. And so, Fall puts his home to the flame. Varry is gone, his life is gone, all that's left is rage. He dons the death mask once meant for his father's tomb, and sets out to ambush the caravan. It's time for another daring rescue, but this time it will be Azerites who pay the debt. The caravan ambush is a scrappy fight, but Fall is able to make it out with the help of the freed prisoners, especially a Chaos champion who barges in to take Fall's place under the Refuser's hammer. When the dust settles, not everyone is willing to join his cause. Some already walk the path to glory, so why would they follow this godless bandit? They're palers, sure, all apart from an opportunistic Free Guild turncoat, but what else is there to bind them? What Fall instinctively understands is that they share a class position, not just as colonial subjects, but as lumpen proletarians. History shows us that revolutions have often regarded the lumpen proletariat with suspicion, and not without good reason. However, figures like Mao or Fanon have recognised that a colonial context makes the revolutionary potential of the lumpen more accessible. Fanon speaks of the dispossessed people who circle cities or are driven into shantytowns. This cohort of starving men, divorced from clan and tribe, have the potential to become a spontaneous and radical force. Fall implores them to use the second chance at life to strike back against the Azerites. He needs followers for his plans to work, but on a deeper level, he has an emotional need to pursue his will to power with kinfolk. Even if he's animated by a vengeful hatred evinced by the gruesome mask, what he's really looking for are comrades, friends, family if they'll have him. With this speech, he's able to galvanise enough to form a small warband, maybe enough to play that new game mode they're doing. Now of course, Fall isn't like a principled communist revolutionary. Not that it would even make sense in this mode of production. He's driven by unrefined spite, a lot of it justified, but, well, we saw what he did in the Beastkin pen. Oh, I was under demonic influence. Yeah, tell it to the judge. Even so, this section of the book raises many of the same dilemmas faced by communists pursuing protracted people's war. I suppose we needn't do a blow-by-blow of Fall's warband gathering the resources needed to challenge Candip. The section's naturalistic structure risked seeming repetitive, but rooting the conflict in scrappy material concerns keeps it interesting. You really get a sense that they're in a precarious position, and need to seize any advantage they have. For instance, when Fall puts his trust in the turncoat to overcome their funding issue with his embezzled Aquag stores, they're able to encourage more volunteers, who can send the pay back to support their families in the Ashwilds. The warband undertakes its first raids against the country manors of Azerite lords. As we know, the agricultural estate is the spearhead of capitalist development, although, since we're in an arid desert, Noah puts a fantastical twist on farming. They're using magic to harvest quicklime out of human bones. I assume Ossiarch Bone Reapers look at that in the same way that Italians look at TikTok pasta innovations. Getting close and personal with the base of Bocchi's economy radicalizes Fall even further, learning of how people are coerced into these farms through debts that are harshly criminalized. He resolves to spare the downtrodden tenants, who go on to spread the legend of the Godeater's son, a name promulgated by his more chaos-inclined followers. Fall's true identity is known only to the turncoat and an old friend he rescued from the cages, but both maintain the Batman Begins position that a masked persona would serve better as a symbol.
As a man, I'm flesh and blood. I can be ignored, I can be destroyed, but as a symbol, I can be incorruptible.
See, this is the problem with revolutions. You're going to have to work with unsavory people, such as Christopher Nolan fans. But speaking of unsavory comrades, Fall has to contend with the contradictions that come from allowing Chaos Marauders into his national liberation movement. Many are keen to break his rules about leaving ordinary palers unharassed. They get harsh treatment from Full-Blart Mall Cop, who executes offenders on the spot. No, I didn't watch that movie. Again, he's intuiting a crucial strategy of a revolutionary insurgency. As Mao says in his treatise about guerrilla war, revolutionaries must have a harmonious relationship with the people, moving through them like a fish through water. A cursory glance at history shows us that treating the poor with respect, like the 26th of July movement, goes a lot further than doing shit like the Shining Path. Let's just say that if we represent the tactics of different left figures with Warhammer terrain, Gonzalo was a bit enthusiastic with the Morpot. Aside from the focus on clear strategic considerations, what makes this part of the book so engaging are the unfolding relationships between Full and his comrades. Even though it's told in first person, Godeater's Son boasts a very well realised supporting cast, a quality it shares with Betrayer. I guess that's why I went to the trouble of sketching some portraits, although it kind of makes me wish I was deep diving Betrayer instead. Would have made the character art a lot easier. The key thing about the book's side characters is that they embody differing class positions and philosophies that bounce off each other in satisfying, perhaps deliberately structuralist ways. It's time to take a look at 4 of Full's foremost followers. We can start with a pair I've already alluded to, Jujar, Full's old Ashstalker comrade, and Boskin, the corrupt Free Guilder captain. Jujar is Full's last remaining link to the past from when they served together in the Ashstalker battalion, and a shared experience of prejudice strengthened their bond. This friendship, as well as experience of command, means that he quickly intuits his place as Full's advisor. On the one hand, Jujar defies colonial ideology, as seen in his vehement repudiation of alcohol as Azerite poison. This is a choice that has clear historical connotations, considering how many indigenous communities have been ravaged by alcoholism. Unfortunately, that national pride has ebbed away since his defiance of primitive accumulation lands him in a cage. After the Ashstalkers were disbanded, he took up poaching on land that the Erden had formerly held in common. Full finds his old friend a sullen, defeated man, but their fight against Candip is able to rekindle that old pride. Jujar's confidence grows over the course of these chapters, transforming from a pessimist to a downright romantic.
Held, would you fall on your sword? I would. A pained smile bent Jujar's lips. I would plant my blade in the sand and fall on it when the time comes. I would take my life for the Erden. That is why we are strong. We are willing to do things the Azerites would not. Thank you for reminding me of who we are.
God, romanticize death any harder and they'll start calling you the Bell Jujar. So, as Jujar's dejection lifts, he comes to embody the nationalist contingent of Full's warband. He's fighting for the Erden, not, as Full pitches, a pan-Paler project. Why do I write so much plosive alliteration? It just peaks. This all means that Jujar dislikes the Outlanders who join Full's movement, and none more than Boskin. Hailing from Golvaria, Michael Boskin is a bit of a cultural chameleon, adopting the Urdu word for captain because it pays better, while trying to make it seem like he's some devout Sigmarite. In the standoff that happens after the rescue, Boskin has to use his wits to avoid retribution from those who up until recently knew him as their jailer, cozying up to Full in the hopes that the Chaos Marauders deem him their new champion. Oh, and Full names the horse he gets from Saroy after him. Is this some power play I'm not aware of? The Trotsky move is to name yourself after the jailer, not your pet.
Boskin jogged into the circle, prodding pistols at the crowd. You named her Mycor. I reckon that's good. I was going to slaughter her, I said. Well, that's disconcerting.
Side note, I want to point out that Full's unfamiliarity with horses is due to them not being native to Bodshi, and so he sees these uncanny beasts as another sign of Sigmarite hegemony. This world-building detail might also be a sly reference to a quirk of early AOS, no horses. It took until the Lumineth release for AOS to get its first actual horse models, which gives rise to that classic joke. A Dawn Rider goes into a bar, and the barman says, "Why the long wait?" Actually, horse aversion comes up in Wynn's subsequent Indrasta novel, so maybe he just hates horses, and who can blame him, the inconsistently satirical bastards? Sorry, I'm getting off track. The question is, why would a scoundrel like Boskin join Full's liberation struggle? Well, much like the wretches who farm quicklime on noble estates, Boskin has debts, and he fears they're going to be called in. Despite his posturing, he's precariously close to Jujar's lumpen class position. Indeed, the pair's similarities go beyond downward mobility.
Boskin tramped back. Don't stare at me like I owe you something. Weren't me made you go poaching. One cannot poach on land stolen from their ancestors, I said. Boskin chuckled. Yes, you can. He peeled back his sweaty sleeve, revealing a poacher's brand on his arm. See? It's the ones with the gallows who get to say. Jujar stared. You hunted your forefathers' lands. Why weren't you sentenced to death? Because I'm not an Ashfoot. I slid my dirk from my sash. Stop saying it. Stop saying the word. But it's the truth, Jujar murmured. We are Ashfeet, and we were poachers. I got so tired of looking at their hunting grounds from the commons, tired of not having what I deserved. The times you speak of when Cardand was ours. The past is dead. We are what they made us, what we made ourselves. My anger guttered away. Poor Jujar. Proud Jujar, who always seethed at the way Ulkarva's blue bloods had spoken to us. My soul sang for my grief at what my friend had become.
Oh, aren't they just two poaching peas in a pod? Ah, fuck, I'm doing it again. Jujar finds bitter comfort in an aggrieved, we are what they made us mentality, which Fool will eventually channel into revolutionary zeal. But what of Boskin? As it turns out, resentment about a stolen heritage is another thing they share. You see, Boskin's family were nobility until Sir Roy stripped them of their titles, so he's happy to join a cause that'll let him take revenge. He's also tagging along in the hopes that Fool will make him a lord. He really wants that insula, like if Sancho Panza traded his delusional lord for a dark triad one. Fool flat out rejects this. He says there'll be no more nobility if they beat the Azerites, but Boskin is gambling on a change of heart. As adversity brings the fighters together, Boskin's ambitions become the object of good-natured mockery, well, excepting Jujar, who doesn't hide his contempt. Oh, he's drinking now. Okay. Jujar may sneer at Boskin and his dreams of ennoblement, but the truth is they mirror one another, both downwardly mobile cynics hitching their wagons to a falling star in the hopes of taking back what they deserve. Yeah, I'm sure that'll take care of the inner lack, guys. Okay, moving on to our next pair, where Jujar and Boskin give Wynne an opportunity to explore certain class dynamics. These two women give us insight into the philosophies of chaos worship. After being freed, Iron initially rejects Fool's project in her own refusal of the call. Hailing from a tribe without nostalgia for fallen Cardand, she has no interest in trading Azerite masters for Erden, believing it to be mere revanchism. To her, it's the path to glory that is the only chance for true sovereignty. Didn't you read the name of your faction? No, I'm not being stupid. Shut up. This book confirms battle line is used in story, so maybe some of them call themselves slaves to darkness too. And if they do, I hope they found a better acronym. On the one hand, Iron's relationship with Chaos is purely transactional, the opposite of Vari's uncomplicated faith in Sigmar. Iron claims not to love or trust the gods, only to seek glory through which her people are protected. I suppose this means her Chaos worship doesn't come from false consciousness. She's too aware and jaded for that. But of course, no worship can be entirely selfish, just as no love can be entirely selfless. Walking the path has imparted on Iron a faith that Fool, in all his nihilism, lacks, which we can see in this exchange.
Enough surprises for one day, she said. Didn't think you had a mother. You, what, thought your gods sent me? That I was born from ash and blood? I saw the wounded faith in Iron's painted eyes. You needn't mock. You smell bad like us, eat like us, but so what if I hoped that we'd earned it and they'd help us? My face smoothed in sympathy. Iron believed in me. And if I didn't believe as she did, it was only because I believed in nothing.
Bro puts on a mask and she's ready to believe in immaculate conception, as if the Godeater's son was brought by a demonic stork. Maybe I spoke too soon about false consciousness, because this degree of hopeful credulity is how people get into QAnon. For all Iron's purported cautiousness, she has a naive hope in chaos as salvation, that it offers a path without end. I guess it's something she needs to believe, given that none of her children survived infancy. Perhaps this fierce faith explains why, when Fool's warband is confronted with a host sent from Candip that outnumbers them 10-1, she spits on Jujar and Boskin's rare agreement to retreat. Fool does well to heed her counsel. Through some shrewd feints and charges, Candip's host is routed, their first taste of true glory. Iron's simultaneous cynicism and sincerity is a deeply human contradiction. Irony, if you will. No, don't make me tap the sign. In her driving motivation to protect her tribe, she's a mirror to Athel.
Iron protected, iron protected.
except that a greater understanding of chaos leads to a greater cognitive dissonance. Now, despite worshipping chaos, Iron distrusts those who completely surrender themselves to the gods, considering that an individualist debasement of the path. Full mocks her for this self-congratulatory delusion, but there is a real difference between Iron and someone who has truly become a warrior of chaos. Someone like Godeater. Full first meets Godeater the Seeker when she tries to slaughter him for Godeater. Now that's what I call a meet cute.
How are you spelling that, by the way?
Therese?
Full only survives the encounter through an act of divine slapstick, and does what anyone would do if fate put a beautiful, deadly, if slightly clumsy warrior at their mercy. He takes her digits. Nonetheless, Godeater is soon tying blades to her stumps to become his strongest ally, despite Iron begging him to kill her. Godeater sees some dark potential in Full, and tries to mold him into a champion for Godeater. Like with Iron, Full rejects her belief, yet Godeater's worship is so fervent, so filled with hostility, it kind of wraps around to become nihilism again.
You fight the false god king, as do I. I fight all gods. You worship them. I worship the death of gods. That is chaos. That is Godeater, who will take all skulls before the realms die.
It's easy to doubt the long-term viability of this anti-god strategy. Like, what happens when Godeater has eaten all the other gods? You gonna bop him on the bonds while he's in a food coma? Then again, that's exactly how the elven gods captured Slaanesh, so maybe Operation Mukbang has legs. It's still more than whatever Mir from Call of Archaon had. Jeez, these Khorne warriors. Everyone wants to kill the guy in charge, but no one has a plan. Still, the long-term outcomes of Godeater's faith don't really matter. As we talked about in regards to Sister Eleni, all gods are scrambling to exert their claims on the soul debt of mortality, so it's very understandable to react to this inherent helplessness with a philosophy that says everything dies, you just have to kill it. I suppose then, if we want to synthesize the key difference between Godeater and Iron's approach to chaos worship, it is this. For Iron, faith is the consequence of self-interested ideological commitment, while Godeater's ideology is the consequence of her faith. It is from Godeater that Full will gain his legendary moniker, the Godeater's son. In a nice world-building flourish, this book has several variations on Khorne worship.
Bloodfather, Godeater, Oxhead.
These are not simply semantic differences, they reveal what the worshippers want from their deity. AOS has been able to rediscover some of the Pantheon's mystique by having various different permutations of chaos worship, which you can see discussed in Queensberry Lodge's video. But to return to this idea of want, Godeater's belief is untainted by self-interest or cynicism, and so she views those who bargain for their god's favour, like Iron, as desperate. Full might agree on that, but even a self-interested ally is more reliable than a mercurial fanatic. Godeater openly admits that her relationship with Full will one day end as it begun, a trial to decide which of them is Skull and which Skull Taker. And this weighs on Full. For all his professed aloofness, he has forged genuine emotional bonds with his fighters. He's almost happy with his new family. Indeed, Full and Godeater both adore Silas, the Hodor-like lunk who spent time in the forges of Hashut and used his dark alchemy to craft Godeater new 8-fingered hands. Godeater's paradoxes draw Full in. She's a merciless killer who delights in fear, but is also rather talkative, or to use a word she's really proud to know, garrulous. She fears Full's rejection, at least in the ideological sense, though there's a hint of attraction towards her as well. Full's romantic, emotional unavailability actually gets explored in a separate short story, in which he is sent to hunt a vampire that turns out to be an ex-girlfriend he dumped even though he was in love, cause yeah, he's always been a self-destructive idiot. His old flame has been resisting the soulblight hunger, and there's a moment of reconciliation where a Twilight-style happily ever after might be possible, but Full chooses to complete his quests instead. The dynamic is reversed with Godeater, because it's her devotion to Godeater that means their relationship will eventually end with a fight to the death. And so, Full resents the sword of Damocles hanging over his friendship with Godeater, which demonstrates how the path to glory undermines a person's emotional ties. Plus, barring any more trip hazards, she would certainly win. Noah gives us enough scenes of Full narrowly avoiding getting walloped by empowered beings to show us that those who reject the boons of the divine, whether Sigmar's reforging or chaos gifts, are at an enormous disadvantage in this world. It's the classic juxtaposition of something ordinary with the superhuman to provide context. but it's also thematically important, because the vulnerability puts pressure on Falls' refusal to worship. He's rejecting a really meaningful boon in order to preserve his agency, which is a lot more interesting than the way the dynamic shakes out in 40k. An absurdly powerful super being getting swayed by a 30% damage increase. But speaking of pressure, Saroy tries a new tactic against the warband. Suddenly, military expeditions or trading caravans disappear. The Outland Lords pack up and return to Candip, making sure there is nothing left to scavenge on their estates. All that's left in the valley are impoverished palers, but turning on them is exactly what Saroy wants. Like the Fidelistas in the Cuban Revolution, Fall refuses to ruin their reputation with the people they're fighting for. Starvation ousts the warband's aversion to cannibalism. A diet of flesh also causes some changes in Mykor's physiology, such as the spines growing out of her flank. The horse has become a visual testament to the creeping debasement of Fall's liberation struggle. You could say, a portrait of Dorian Nay? To be fair, Fall doesn't know much about horses. Maybe the red eyes and fangs are perfectly normal. When they're attacked by some Candip mercenaries who didn't get the memo, everyone is glad to have meat. But Kadra's preternatural sense of smell leads to a more interesting discovery, one of Fall's long-lost brothers. While orphaned Heldenarr ended up in the slums, this brother was adopted by Azerite nobility. Fall confesses to him what even his followers don't know. Family started this war. He asks his brother to defect to their side, neglecting to mention, of course, that Varry would never have accepted, and neither does this guy. Apparently, Ildred the Refuser is the one pursuing this strategy of denial, because she believes that Fall can be redeemed, reclaimed, before he turns to the gods. Fall's confidence is unravelling. They have it wrong, he protests. He's fighting on the behalf of the small folk, not chaos nonsense. Then why have the blood rains come, his brother shoots back. As with his horse, the lands are changing into something terrible because of his actions, whether he intends to bolster chaos or not. With their differences irreconcilable, Fall gives his brother a merciful death. Kadra, though, planned to ritualistically eat him together, so she hits levels of hangry not seen in the realm since an ogre tried the South Beach diet. Kadra scorns Fall's attachment to family, an attitude that comes from her parents offering her up to the call to save themselves. Oh, hey Corgus, how's it going? Yeah, I did see your new model. Pretty cool. You know, I had that bit in my script since December, when I assumed a new coal model was right around the corner. Well, since then, the only coal we got was of my friend's army. What a stupid fucking decision. I don't understand why... Wait, where was I? Oh, yeah.
Cole showed me the truth. Cattle is all we are. Family is just a closer cut of meat. You wanted family? I was your family. And Siloth, and your drunkard kin brother, and that wilding woman, even the grubby pistolier. Where is our meat?
With the test flunked, Fall's final trial has come. He ducks and weaves Kadra's maul, but we already know he has no hope of victory, save for some unforeseen environmental hazard. Which turns out to be Silas. The warband mascot, getting disemboweled, serves as our divine act of slapstick. It's just as Mark says, first as farce, then as tragedy. Kadra might be a bloodthirsty chaos champion, but she feels regret and grief for killing a man she didn't mean to. She pays her respects, uttering, almost tenderly, blood for the blood god. And if you think this first appearance of Khorne's mantra has surprising emotional heft, just you wait until the second. After all that anger at his mercy, who can say why Kadra leaves Fall alive? Control or lack of it, a fondness shy of love, a respect short of reverence. He stands vigil over Silas's corpse for days, killing his warriors when they attempt to move him. Eventually, Boskin breaks through his brooding with the news that Candip City is relatively undefended. They have an opportunity to strike. As with the previous section, we didn't get too granular with the battle. Why would you expect tactical insight from a Warhammer fan like me anyway? However, there is something to say about the spearhead of the attack. Fall encounters a shanty town of refugees on the outskirts of the city, corralled away from the unprotected reaches of Bodshi as to starve the warband of support. Surprise surprise, forced relocation doesn't endear a people to their government, and with an impassioned speech, Fall is able to turn the sympathetic lumpen into a spontaneous vanguard. Even he's surprised in himself. He didn't come here to start a revolution, and yet there it is. However, the first person perspective later shows that Fall's aims are exceedingly cynical. He's planning to use them as human shields against a possible demigryph charge. This turns out to be a moot point because, lucky for Full, GW removed them from the game. Man, demigryphs, pistoliers, and like the entire Beasts of Chaos range? This book is only 2 years old, and yet reading it is like the scene from Titanic where Rose reunites with the ghosts from her past. I want to take a moment to examine the concept of human shielding, as outlined in Neve Gordon and Nicola Peregrini's book. Though it's a practice that has existed in warfare since antiquity, the codification of human shields as a war crime emerged after the Second World War, and perhaps more so than other war crime accusations, seems primarily levelled by advanced military occupiers against resistance movements. This is because the idea of the human shield disrupts the neat distinction between combatant and non-combatant, that is the bedrock of laws of war. We've touched on Mao's fish in water strategy of People's War, which influenced many movements in the global south, such as in Algeria, Palestine and Vietnam. The distinction between combatant and non-combatant is treated as a porous threshold because, given the asymmetry of power between the revolutionary forces and the foreign invaders, only those able to swiftly blend into the local population could achieve their political aims. So, when the Viet Cong implemented this strategy against the US in the Vietnam War, the Americans reduced People's War, a strategy of political struggle rather than military fighting, to an act of human shielding. The press used the participation of non-combatants as evidence of the inhumane and evil nature of the communist enemy. Facing guerrillas who moved among the people like fish through water, the US tried to drain the sea, implementing the Phoenix program, a strategy of infiltration, torture and assassination that completely disregarded the distinction between combatant and non-combatant. And this is an all too common facet of the imperial aggressor complaining about human shields. Even if the allegations were true, it didn't stop Vietnamese villages from being massacred then, or Gazan hospitals from being bombed now. Reducing People's War to an illegal act of human shielding should be understood as an effort to outlaw the right to resist foreign invaders. The same strategies which were used in the American Revolution against the British or European partisans against fascists are suddenly deemed sinister when adopted by decolonial movements in the global south. Shifting back to Godeater's son, you'll notice that, unlike the case of Vietnam or Algeria, the use of human shields is unambiguous. Full goes beyond the classic military tactic of having an expendable vanguard because these are non-combatants that he has aroused into action, using the language of liberation. Now, obviously, I have no problem with Full being a morally dubious character. It's something that gives the book a lot of philosophical texture. But how should we think of his cynical appropriation of People's War? Because one interpretation of this is that Wynne uncritically reproduces propaganda narratives about human shielding. You could use his interview statement ascribing humanity to Afghan resistance to refute that, or not, because either way we're speculating about politics that are hard to verify from an ambiguous scene or statement. Unless we find out that Noah submitted his first draft in Maoist standard English. Still, I don't think we need to decode his exact opinions to get a sense of how this works in the story. We're looking at chaos co-opting liberation struggles, so moral corruption is the whole point. And here we see Full's warband indulge in brutal excesses that conflict with his professed principles. Once they find the inner sanctums bereft of Azerite lords, they instead attack the Palers who served them. Are they class traitors? Perhaps, but this is an act of sadism that has no defensible political utility. I originally had a whole section of historical analogies here, but oh god does this script need trimming, and I think you get the point. Hate is a valid component of a revolutionary struggle, but without a coherent political program, hatred poisons a revolution's soul. Thinking back to the introductory Fanon segment, we looked at how violent struggle undertaken by the masses has two benefits. It expels the inferiority complex propagated by colonial ideology and endows the masses with a unifying agency that doesn't allow a single person to come forward as liberator. As for these guys, they're not getting full marks. Full's search for Azerites takes him to the cathedral, the same venue in which he hallucinated marrying his vampire ex in Crown of Flames, funnily enough. The lone figure of Ildrid Stormsworn receives him, a less welcome sight than a bride, although admittedly she is glowing. As we know, the strategy of denial and indirect warfare Full initially attributed to Soroy was Ildrid's doing. Well, yeah, she's the refuser. Even so, Full is shocked at the depth of the antipathy between the Stormcast and the Regent. Ildrid admits that Candip's majesty is built on the broken backs of the native people, and this disgusts her. Crucially, she alludes to Soroy's regime damning mortals to a fate worse than death. Here is the unjust status quo that gives rise to chaos reaction. Thus, Fall is in the weird position of having his grievances validated by the enemy.
He said, no offence, mate, but I think what you've done out there was awful, obscene, and at worst, you should be in prison for life, and at best, you should be executed. And I said to him, I agree with you, to be honest, you know.
Not alone among Black Library authors, Noah is able to square the circle of the Stormcast as morally ambiguous yet heroic protagonists. It's a key balancing act of AOS. Neither the frothing fascism of 40k, nor the two-dimensional morality of, well, the version of AOS its detractors have invented. So what we have are idealists who prioritize liberating the realms from chaos over building a truly just society. Yet, as even Ildrid admits, tolerating an unjust status quo creates the conditions for chaos worship. Basically, Stormcast embody liberalism. Why do you think everyone calls their core unit libs? Ildrid reveals that her true purpose in Candip was always to pass judgment on Soroy's rule. She promises the Regent will be dealt with. Although, reading between the lines, it seems the main reason this is even deemed urgent is that her rivalry with Hammerhall interferes with Sigmar's military plans. Of course, agreeing that Soroy sucks doesn't clear the air between Ildrid and Fall, especially in light of all the cruelty and bloodshed he perpetrated. How can he do such things and consider his cause just? But Fall doesn't consider his cause just. That's the whole point.
I met my brother the other day. Before I killed him, he told me, you think us victims, you think we can be reclaimed, but we've nothing left to redeem, Stormcast, nothing left to save. You took it already. You, your people, your God.
There's no righteousness in this revenge, no belief in a rejuvenated future for the Erden, and no ideology but nihilism. It's as Jujar put it, we are what they made us, what we made ourselves. But despite all that, the Refuser extends the olive branch of redemption. A thorny branch, to be sure, as his crimes require a lot of atonement. But stir, olive trees don't have thorns. Yeah, neither do horses. It's a fantasy story. Shut up. Ildrid is giving him this one chance because he still refuses the dark powers. She implores him to find it in himself to have faith, because no one can survive in the realms without believing in something. She's pretty invested in this whole redemption arc, to the extent that she's given some of his dead fighters Sigmarite funerary rites. None of this has swayed Fall though. Even if he could believe that Soroy will be punished, why would he listen to this Stormcast imperialist? Sorry, that's the Maoist standard English again. Well, the Refuser hits him with a classic AOS twist. Every fantasy series has their favourite trope. A Song of Ice and Fire has the Evil Lord, the Horus Heresy has the Evil Sword, and Age of Sigmar has the Stormcast umbilical cord. You see, many authors have recognised the premise of Reforged Eternals creates opportunities for them to interact with the descendants they left behind. That's right, she's his mum. Maybe you picked up on the Stormcast maternal twist from these cheeky hints earlier in the video. Or, if you've read the book, the scene where Mr. "Me mum was taken by lightning" has a Stormcast yell cryptic nursery rhymes at him ensures you get it. Get tinnitus, that is. Yeah, so the foreshadowing is about twice as loud as it needs to be, but honestly, that's fine. It's more important for the twist to be emotionally meaningful than truly surprising. And it certainly shakes Fall. A parent whose loss shaped the contours of his inner abyss is not only back, but as an enemy. With his emotional walls crumbling, he finds himself asking if the offer of redemption extends to his warband. The Refuser won't vouch for slaves to darkness, and so his fighters start inching away from the altar. Naughty children terrified of the neighbourhood's scariest mother. But the fact remains, they're his people, and he won't give them up for anything as facile as faith. Fall does what he does best, and refuses the Refuser. Since Ildrid's olive branch doesn't strike oil, okay, that's definitely not right. Fall prepares to duel a vastly superior opponent. His only comfort the burning skies which deny Stormcast souls from returning to be reforged. Ildrid is disappointed, but she goes back to rummage in her bag of borrowed twists. Okay, let's see. We've done the reverse Vader. What else? Sixth Sense? Nah, that wouldn't make any sense. Saint Elsewhere? Nah, that's not even a real twist. The realm is already suspended in a giant snow globe. Okay, I've got it. How about a bit of Ozymandias?
That was your ploy. You thought the cursed skies would protect you? I would not have allowed any of this to occur were there any chance of failure. My chamber arrived 3 weeks ago.
That's right, the snide little joke Full made earlier about Sigmar clinging to the rafters turns out to be literally true. A bunch of Stormcast sally forth, and the sack goes sour. As his fighters are slaughtered, Full finds himself in the grasp of his mother, only for Khadra to make a surprise attack entrance, clearly her favourite method of greeting. With all that, Full's designs are in shambles. His little war has ended, and he is a helpless observer to the two empowered titans fighting over possession of his soul. It's like he's Charlie Sheen in Platoon, but he's kind of attracted to Barnes, and Elias is his mum. As Khadra whisks Full away from the massacre, he slips into delirium, hallucinating the realm of chaos and the leer of Godeater. He even spies the wandering soul of Silas, murmuring his ditty, "They puts it down, I picks it up." Oh, so it's like a thematic hold the door. The cycle of violence, get it? Khadra's ulterior motives for the rescue become clear when she delivers Full into the clutches of strange, Urdu-speaking Chaos Warriors. Upon attempting escape, Full discovers he's been taken to the lost Urdun kingdom of Barat. Turns out that Barat's fate was literally swept under the carpet. A chaos ritual suspended it beneath Akshi. It's trippy, cool, though slightly hard to picture without any art. What's the underside of the Realm of Fire look like? The realm of lighter fluid and newspapers? I guess it's quite ratty now. Full learns of Barat's dark history from its spiritual leader, Tomina, who has an even darker sense of humour. Can you tell I'm getting a bit sick of drawing characters?
"This is your horse's meat." I digested the words, but nothing else. Then I reached for my blades. "I only jest. This is common swine, pork." Amusing. "This is Barat's custom. Humour is our greatest trial. You and yours forgot the old ways, but not we. We search for weakness, for those who laugh. They always give in to Akshi's fire. Understand? We excise laughers from our number. No ice in their hearts." "I laugh often," I said flatly. "I'm very humorous." "Oh," her eyes fell, then widened. "Oh, that is very good. Humorous indeed."
While Tomina values some aspects of Urdun culture, she also admonishes Full's disapproval of Barat's open gate policy to outsiders. Their city is populated by warriors from every background, including Azerites. The path to glory has supplanted the old ways. Indeed, it has become the fourth pillar of Urdaval. To Full's horror, she explains that it wasn't foreigners who brought Cardan to its knees, but fellow Urdun. She's not pulling his leg, well, she's telling him a difficult truth. Barat's Urdun legions brought chaos to the Pale, and thus paved the way for Azerite conquest. And isn't that a historical classic, colonizers exploiting internal divisions to make their play? Tomina maintains that faith in what she calls Bloodfather transcends national ties. So, ironically, blood is not thicker than water. Faith is what really binds, so they must do as the Sigmarites do, and build an empire based on shared belief. She presents an offer. Full can prepare to undertake the trial of the Chosen to see if he is worthy of leading Barat's warriors. Or, well, die. Not much of a choice, but Full so badly wants to refuse, spit on their faith, take his agency to the grave, and yet, this trial would mean going to Ashur, the holy mountain where the true Urdun are said to have gone and are awaiting a champion to lead them. Another trial with an evil mountain? Uh-oh. But Full is not simply fixated on acquiring a pro-painted army on the cheap. We've watched him lose his family, and then the chosen kin of his warband. It sounds cheesy, but he craves to be among those he can love, and so, even if it means living among these cornate weirdos, he decides that the true Urdun can fill that hole.
They would understand, because they were family. They would know what I wanted, even if I did not. After Candip and Ildrid, I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. I just knew I didn't want it alone.
Basically, hitting rock bottom has made Full go more trad than even Jujar. And while we're comparing characters, Tomina gives us yet another subtly different variation on chaos worship. You might think that a non-transactional faith in Bloodfather would win Khadra's respect, but she mocks her blood-pappy nonsense. Khadi derides Tomina's belief as too complex and sophisticated. Hers is much more primitive, innate. She's just a simple country girl, and when it comes to Khorne, country girls make do. Of course, Full knows Khadra's ideas are anything but straightforward, but it rings true to life that a religious fanatic would view everyone else's faith as convoluted or desperate. Furthermore, you can see Tomina's justifications of Barat's conquests as Iron's philosophy writ large. It was a choice made to save their people. Indeed, the way Tomina speaks about glory leading to freedom and immortality consciously reminds Full of Iron, yet she has a very, from a certain point of view, definition of those concepts. To Tomina, agency is an illusion. A mortal's mind and soul are doomed to be taken by the gods, whether Sigmar, Chaos or Nagash, but their name, their deeds, their glory can live on. This is another way of reacting to the soul debt of mortality. Rather than throwing your lot in with Sigmar, like Eleni, or raging against godly entitlements like Kadara, Tomina accepts the soul debt will be paid, but takes solace in what they cannot take away. Also, to take a step back for a sec, Noah should be commended for writing so many varied female characters. Hell, even the Mega Gargant is female. There is, however, an amusing gender demarcation. The book's 3 prominent male characters, Full, Juja and Boskin, are all bitter, non-religious arseholes, whereas the one commonality between all the women, well, except perhaps the Gargant, is that they're a different kind of religious kook.
It takes a lot to make a stew.
A pinch of salt and laughter too.
A scoop of kids to add the spice.
A dash of love to make it nice, and you got
too many cooks.
Too many cooks.
I don't think Noah meant anything by this, I just found it a funny coincidence. My point here is to praise the quality, quantity and variety of the book's female characters. Full prepares for the trial at Ashur Ashura and finds comfort sparring with Kadara. As ever, the experience of fighting her is like opening a jar of pickled eggs with a hammer, and he's the egg. Kadara's divine blessings make her impossible to defeat without the intervention of, environmental hazards. We're always reminded of that frustrating paradox of her seeing him as just another skull for Godeater, yet there being an underlying fondness too, maybe more than she wants to admit. Full muses that Kadara's contradictions are the key to understanding her. She's a merciless killer, worn smooth by centuries beyond Full's fathom, yet vestiges of humanity remain. After the disaster of Candip, Full has yearned for emotional connection, all while chafing against Tomina's arbitrary restrictions, and Kadara's company is a salve for both. There's a fun moment after sparring where Kadara reenacts that park scene from Annie Hall, roasting passers-by to make Full laugh until his mouth goes dry.
Look at that guy. There's Mr. in the pink, Mr. Miami Beach there, you know? He's just come back from the gin rummy finals. I think where he's placed 3rd.
Okay, it's a bit unfair to compare anyone, even a mass murderer like Kadara, to Woody Allen, although the age gap between her and Full isn't far off his preference. Now, as you may recall, Barrett enforces a strong taboo against tittering, so when Tomina finds them cackling behind the bike shed, she's pissed. Apparently, none in Barrett berate quite like her. My favourite insults are probably ogres on a fast, Troggoths writing songs, and like Oryx crossed with dumber Oryx. After Tomina gets that out of her system, she drops the real bomb. It's time for the trial of the chosen. So they descend to Ashur Ashura, the mountain below/above. Will this be another case of an evil mountain blowing our lad's mind? Well, it's more like the later appearances of Gregor Clegane, because they're greeted by a bunch of armoured revenants. The true Yrden are all dead, sacrificed to open a gate into Khorne's realm. The Urdo revanchism that has fueled Full since the Sack of Candip shatter. The sight of his people's butchered carcasses births a realization that they did this, they chose this. If the 4th pillar of Urdoval led to a charnel pit, then what was its value? The pillars are meaningless. Full and Kadara gaze into the realm of skulls, glimpsing the immense presence of Bloodfather, Godeater, Khorne and despair. Full senses none of that martial honour nonsense, a take I've never found fitting given it contradicts the whole Khorne cares not from whence the blood flows thing. Not he, nor like Sigmar or she like Alariel, but it. It is the embodiment of slaughter, the moment of murder. Worst of all, the sheer traumatic scale of Khorne's might makes Full realise that none could triumph over chaos. Sigmar cannot resist the resistless. Okay, fine, you get a little bit of cosmic horror as a treat. Even Kadara doesn't recognise this malign thing as her Godeater. And so, rather than fight a legion of thralls like all the other idiots Barrett sent, they decide to Godeater's run. Sometimes egress is the better part of aggress. And so, Full's closest brush with chaos, yet only strengthens his antipathy. He deserves the mantle of refuser even more than his mother. However, these refusals are not repetitive. The arc Noah has written for Fall is one of incremental but meaningful change. He managed to shake off the demonic influence of Orb Infernio at the Beastkin camp, refusing the libidinal lure of chaos. As he gathered a warband, he also refused the belief systems of Kadra and Iron, doubling down on his philosophy of nihilistic independence. After the Candip defeat, he's longed for a sense of belonging, descending to Ashura in the hopes of communing with his ancestors. Instead, witnessing the cosmic horror of Khorne shattered his fantasies of a romanticized national tradition, because he recognizes the fact that the ancient Erden stood on this same precipice and chose false gods. All the same, witnessing the power of a Chaos God has knocked his confidence in individual agency. One cannot overcome the inevitable. The pair leap through a realm gate that takes them back to Bodshi, where they come across a settlement besieged by marauders. When they help the village, Fall gets recognised as the Godeater's son by some formerly indentured servants he freed during his guerrilla war. They implore him to stamp out the raiders, which are led by one of his former followers. Fall is incensed at the prospect of a betrayer, probably that greedy turncoat Boskin, but how had he managed to usurp him so quickly? Now, we get another fun, if heavily telegraphed, reveal. Despite experiencing his time in Bharat as 8 weeks, he has returned after 8 years, in which time his attack on Candip has become a legend among the poor folk of Bodshi. I really love time jumps in stories. Writers are understandably wary of undercutting urgency, but on the other hand, it's so satisfying to watch the repercussions of decisions grow in the way only time can allow. We get to see how the 8-year aftermath of the defeat at Candip has affected the fighters, starting with the betrayer, Jujar. Fall barely recognises his old friend. Fueled by greed and wine, Jujar has become one of the several warlords terrorising the small folk of Bodshi. His kingdom cashes in on the legend of the God-Eater's son and turns it into corrupted Erden revanchism. All of Iron's initial fears about Fall's movement are validated. Having entered the camp in disguise, Fall seethes at how Jujar has corrupted his cause. This is a man whose promises of glorious self-sacrifice are still fresh in his mind, but Jujar didn't fall on his sword, he replaced Fall as Lord. He wants to build a kingdom like the great Erden houses of old, which, I'd remind you, a younger and more sober Jujar admitted were failures. Looks like Jujar has once again overtaken Fall in the contest of who is a bigger return to tradition reactionary, since Fall's recent return trip to Hell cured his case of syncretic cretin. He's come from the place where the Erden died, where people like Jujar killed them. Fall throws off his disguise and seizes control of the warband, and it's only the realization of how long he's been gone that spares Jujar's life. With that, the old hierarchy is re-established, only lacking its old warmth. War and drink have changed Jujar, and Fall cannot forgive his old friend. But the disillusionment goes both ways. For years after the Sack of Candip, Jujar remained loyal to the cause, until the day a soldier that Fall had tortured but kept alive out of spite came looking for revenge. That was the context of the "we do things they are unwilling to do" scene, by the way. Yeah, less inspiring now. This moment opens Jujar's eyes to the fact that Fall's nihilistic rage sought to simply prolong the cycle of violence.
You asked how long it took for me to abandon your cause. It was then. I shivered from dusk's unwelcome chill. Why? Because I understood what you'd wanted then. You wanted to do to the Azerites exactly what had been done to you. You wanted worse. I can think of nothing more terrible than that, Held. Nothing at all.
Jujar might be a greedy drunkard, but he realised the ideological hollowness of Fall's cause and turned to Erden revanchism to fill the gap. His excesses have also gradually pushed him toward the path to glory over the years, and it seems like only a matter of time before he is tempted into full-on chaos worship. And if you think Jujar has become a sad, degraded version of himself, let's check in on another one of his followers. Fall is directed to the keep of Mad Earl Boskin. So he's finally attained his goal of lordship, has he? Sancho finally got himself that insula. But Boskin's castle is more of an insula. A big, smelly Guna cave where he's lost his mind. You see, the blood rains that have plagued Bodshi since the Little War spread a delusion not dissimilar to the Flesh-Eater Court's curse. A diet of rancid blood has made an honest madman out of Boskin. He admits he had initially planned to use Fall for his own selfish ends, but becoming the Mad Earl has engendered a sense of responsibility that comes of leadership. Boskin has genuinely missed Fall and remained more faithful to his legacy than Jujar has. He sees the God-Eater's son as a worthy liege, and that a worthy liege is something he deserves. Noah's chaos twist on the Flesh Eater delusion is fun, though considering how much Nagash cares about proprietary stuff, I'd be expecting a letter from his lawyers. Also, I'm feeling pretty validated in my reliance on Don Quixote to explain ghouls in the last video, since Boskin has reached a precise synthesis of the two central characters. Rather than a delusion that comes from romanticizing chivalric traditions, this Sancho Panza figure has been addled by his obsession with attaining a governorship. And now, even in his degraded state, Boskin continues to mirror Jujar. Without Full to guide these men, greed and an addiction to mind-altering drink has taken the steering wheel. Both have hauled themselves from the lumpen proletariat and achieved their dreams of power, and what ugly dreams they are. This is a neat encapsulation of how, without principled political framework, the aspirations of the lumpen can be pretty reactionary. Yet, ironically considering his delusion, Boskin seems more aware of this ugliness than Jujar. He is no longer slave to his resentments, and any thirst for vengeance against Saroy for degentrifying his family has faded.
I don't hate her guts like I used to. Almost pity her, I do. Why? I gazed down. Charity? The goodness of your heart? A troubled look flickered across Boskin's face. For a moment his eyes welled and his lips grew tremulous. I thought he saw what I saw then. I thought he saw himself. I don't think I'm all that charitable. I don't think I'm all that good in the heart. As I rode into Cardan's labyrinth, Boskin sang out of tune. He stopped 3 times to curse his vassals for their lack of rhythm. I didn't tell him we were alone.
As you might remember, Full took Boskin's first name, Mycor, for his horse. In an ironclad case of nominative determinism, loyalty to their shared master has transformed both into flesh-eating monstrosities. Full thinks he sees recognition in Mycor's eyes as she looks at Boskin. He makes a promise to himself that, unlike the Mycors, he will notice the moment his soul slips away. I hope it's obvious now why I've spent so much time on the supporting characters. They get to change in satisfying ways that complement Full's arc and make interesting observations about class dynamics. I enjoy the irony that treacherous Boskin is the only one to remain utterly loyal to the cause, which Full learned when he reunites with... come back here, it's your turn. When he reunites with Iron. She has ended up in the thrall of a rival, a Tzeentchian warlord whose affinity for flies has Nurgle sending a cease and desist. Man, these idiots had better hire some Caradhran counsel for all the lawsuits. But it's Full who is the fly in amber, returning to Bodshi after nearly a decade. The 8 years have been tough on Iron, wearing down her ideals. A once confident stride down the path to glory has diminished into a sad virgin walk.
You once asked where this path leads. Now I can answer. Before the gods' blessings twist their champions into monsters, they twist their minds around their craving for glory, power, Eardon's son. It's their addiction. Like the Azorites. Maybe, she exhaled. You've always been right to defy the gods. I didn't see, but I do now. That is the true path to glory, perhaps. Defiance. But I'm too afraid to dare.
Chumminess saps out of the encounter though, because Full suspects Iron of betraying their plans to Sack Candip. Jujar might be a snake, but he's an old friend and she is not. Iron responds with an impressive dressing down. He was so quick to trust fickle Kadra, an overflowing vessel of dark blessings who only cared about taking skulls, including, on 2 occasions, his own. Iron and her kin fought because they believed in him, the God-Eater's son, and what thanks do they get for giving what little they had? Suspicion? Her speech has Full's cheeks burning beneath his mask. For all the rage about Azorites treating the reclaimed as second-tier citizens, he has rarely considered how the weakest of his warband bore the brunt of the sacrifice. Well, unless there's rumours of demigryphs, in which case he's blowing the fucking whistle. Despite Full's efforts at getting the warband back together, Iron mirrors their first encounter by refusing. Yeah, how does that feel? Iron is torn between her oaths to the new master and her enduring loyalty to the God-Eater's son. Her inner turmoil culminates when Full's parley with his Tzeentchian rival is interrupted by some Dawnbringers from Hammerhole that seek to crush both the Marauders as well as Saroy's own authority. Iron stabs her master in the back, allowing Full to consolidate the legions under his command. You'd think a Tzeentchian would respect the betrayal, but no, backstabbing is only funny when it's someone else's back. Rules for Tzeentch, but not for Minch, I guess. That's why my bare-chested demon prince has an armor plate on his spine, if you were wondering. No, I don't think anyone was. Anyway, Iron breaks more than just her oath to the Tzeentchian lord. She does something rarely seen in a Warhammer story, and steps away from the path to glory. She's beaten off the path, or however that saying goes.
I could really use you tomorrow. I feigned cool indifference. Iron's eyes moistened. I believe in your path to glory, Irden's son. Not in the others who walk this road, but your path, your glory. But I can't go as far as you have. The way is supposed to be a means. For me, it can only ever be an end. I searched for words and found nothing. Iron had always been so certain. Here I learned all that certainty had stood on a bed of ice. Now it had melted away. "Come with me," she said. I blinked. Desire sliced away at me, and ancient loathing filled the cracks. These lands hold my heart, my people, my fighters. There are other things worth living for. I fell silent for 3 breaths. Not for me, I exhaled. Go, Iron. Live in peace.
I love this bittersweet moment. De-chaosification is something we occasionally get in AOS, like those Stormcast Eternals reforged from redeemed Nurgle warriors. But that's defection. This is retirement. Alone among Fool's foremost followers, she's able to assimilate his most admirable quality, an unwillingness to submit to the gods, with something he lacks, a peaceful vision of the future for her kin. So yeah, it's a satisfyingly nuanced resolution of her contradictions. She proves her loyalty by breaking laws. She follows his lead but not his cause. And isn't it ironic? Don't you think? It's like rain on your wedding day. As I mentioned earlier, there's a Chaos Marauder refresh coming out, which would be more exciting if it hadn't also entailed a mass squatting of Warcry cultists, you know, the best miniatures they've ever produced. God damn it, I wanted to get the Splintered Fang, but no, because of some broken rules they were unavailable for ages, and now I've missed my chance. No use war crying over spilt snakes. The point is, the new Dark Oath lore seems to double down on the themes expressed in Godeater's Son, especially what we saw in the supporting cast. But let's not have the gall to forget Heldenarr Falls. This whole post-Barrett section's focus on strategic concerns mirrors the early days of his little war, only now the scale has increased. Fall is able to use the legend of the Godeater's Son to amass an army big enough to finish what he started in Candip. But of course, after all he's been through, his goals are not precisely the same. He's still too emotionally damaged to accept Iron's offer of a new life, though he's also grown past the sectarian revanches that animates Jujar. He's gazed upon the blood-soaked domain of the Lord of Skulls, and it's only reified his rejection of chaos. As he tells Khadra, he's not the Godeater's son. He wants victory, not skulls. He wants freedom! It's been a consistent sticking point between William Fallis over here and Khadra, and it remains unresolved when she goes missing during the Dawnbringer ambush. We're almost at the story's climax, but I want to spotlight something first. The Dawnbringer army, yeah, I will continue to reject the term crusade, not to be salty, but it's a bit Deus Volti. The Dawnstirrers have a contingent of Caradhran airships, and when Full clambers onto an ironclad, he comes face to face, well, crotch to face, with Hewer Duranson, the guy he and Varry used to sell Magmuir to. Like Full's Free Guilder brother, Hewer sees him as proof of the concept that slaves to darkness never know what they are. His unintimidated reaction couldn't humiliate Full anymore without pinching the cheeks of his mask and telling him how much he's grown. But speaking of Magmuir, it turns out that Lavamander dung is a bit more valuable than the siblings thought. Brightstone, as it's known in polite society, is even more crucial to Soroy's power than Aqua Garanis, and it is also the foundation of her rivalry with Hammerhall. A valuable and highly combustive resource that forms the basis of vast fortunes and imperialist conquest. I feel like there's an analogy here, but it's hard to separate, like oil and water. Or however that saying goes. And if it wasn't already obvious, Hewer was buying their Magmuir for a pittance of its true value. Told you, unequal exchange. The advanced capitalists are siphoning raw materials from the colonial periphery. Isn't AOS so implausible? Suddenly, a lot of things fall, for fuck's sake, slot into place for Fall. Ildred asked about Brightstone during their last meeting. Now he learns it's because Soroy claimed his fighters took her supply, a lie which was also the basis of her contract with the Dwarden. You'd think a Dwarden would respect Soroy's hustle, but no, a con is only funny when it's someone else getting conned. Rules for thee, but not for, Grunge-knee? Really pushing it with that one. Soroy's breach of contract is good news for Full, who seizes the opportunity to forge an alliance with the Caradhran. The Dawnbringer ambush had sought to turn the separate factions of rebels against one another, and so Full wants to do the same to the Azerites. They did hire that council after all. Aside from procuring a skyship flyby, though, the revelation of Soroy's corruption gives Full an idea. If he informs his mother about the depth of Soroy's exploitation, he reasons, she'll be forced to turn on the Regent. Given he'll be saying that with an army of Chaos Marauders at his back, I think his expectations of Ildrid's receptivity are somewhat, foolish. Let's see how that works for him, huh? But before he can convince his enemies to betray each other, he has to deal with a betrayer of his own. Are you sick of that sight gag yet? Jujar isn't. Unable to forgive Full's tolerance of non-Erden comrades, he shares their plans with the enemy, just as, shocker, he did 8 years previously. All those big words about glorious self-sacrifice, and he's ready to sell out just for the chance to be in charge. Jujar, more like Reza Shah. Hey, didn't Chris Morris say he was going to do a film about the 1953 Iranian coup? He's taking longer on that project than, well, maybe I shouldn't glass houses and whatnot. Jujar's quisling career is a bit shorter than the Shah's, though. He gets shot by Candip fusils. After all that, they couldn't even tell him apart from the other Erden. Confessing to Full spurs a last-minute change of heart, and so he draws the soldiers out by assuming the identity of the Godeater's son. Judas over here got to fall on his sword in the end, I guess. There's a lot more battle stuff, but this video is ballooned beyond reason, so let's just stick with the resolving character arc, shall we? How about Full's final confrontation with Stormcast Maternal? Full's desperate pleas for her to sit down and listen to his presentation about political corruption does not impress. And, good. Full's Brightstone Gambit is exactly the kind of wishful thinking that should not have played out as he hoped. No longer holding back, we once again see how an empowered demigod stomps even a skilled mortal. Ildrid effortlessly makes her son eat goddamn dirt. And the only nick he gets in on her just ends up blowing his fingers off. Without Khadra there to save him, it's curtains for the Godeater's son. Ildrid tenderly wraps her hand around his back and skewers him on the blade Jujar gifted so long ago. You know, that guy's managing to backstab Full from beyond the grave.
Life and fire bled from me. Deeper within, a hole gaped where my soul had been. Mother, I wheezed. I am not your mother, Ildrid spat. I refuse you.
Our story could have ended here. In the sense that it's the story of one man's fight for agency, it does. Full has failed. Failed to overcome his enemies, failed to live up to his ideals, failed to change the mind of his mother. Faced with utter helplessness, he does the only thing left. He gives it all away. His past, his pain, his story, his name. He gives it all to the powers that damned him. Heldenarr Falls. Despite his Chaos Corruption arc literally being given away by the cover, I still dared to hope he would refuse. His fatalistic capitulation to Chaos is an emotional decision, but a lucid one. There's no magic sword or psychic interference taking charge. Sure, the choice is partly coerced by the whole dying business, but he's faced death with suicidal disregard before, and even contemplated throwing his life away as a petty gesture just to prove he was in control. And that's what's changed. He doesn't feel that control anymore. There's no need for an agency-erasing artifact when his existential crisis is about lacking agency in the first place. Aside from benefiting from a first-person perspective, this set piece is not so different to the arcs of Fulgrim or Korgos. Then again, if the thing that made Godeater's son exceptional was all in the ending, this video could have been an hour shorter. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? No, the power of the culmination is based on the preceding psychological and thematic progression we've examined. You know, the incremental change I was hoping for. Noah gradually weakens the emotional underpinnings of his refusal to serve the gods. Vari's loss left him with no family to fight for, so his independent struggle was fueled by nihilistic revenge. After that failed, he latched onto a revanchist nationalism, and then, finally, a self-deceiving idealism. Each dissolution of an ideological coping mechanism exposes more of his hollow core, and so, when he ends up violating his most vociferous principle, it doesn't feel abrupt, but deeply emotionally believable. What's more, it's clear that his fight for agency and control has always had an individualistic defect. Every time he repeats the mantra, where Azerite's rule freedom dies, he never interrogates whose freedom, because confronting that myopia would conflict with what he claims to stand for. Denial is not a river in Egypt. The cultural pastiche goes a bit further east. But it is the nail in the coffin of his resistance, because ultimately all it takes to break his spirit is disillusionment with his own will to power. demonic strength possesses Falls' body. He senses Khorne's hunger for his soul and seizes on the only petty freedom he has left.
Khorne shoved baleful blessings into my hands, demanding my affections. Boundless force raged through me in wild torrents. This was control. Faith in the cackling god pawing at the scraps of me. Khorne cared nothing for me. Khorne only craved my soul. Against Khorne's hunger, faith was my only currency. Faith protected me because only I could dispense it. And what was freely given, even from an ant like me, could be freely taken away.
Even now, Falls scorns Khorne's call. He submitted, but insists on being bratty about it.
You're tapping from the bottom, Mrs. Grey.
I don't really know what that means, as I follow Li Feng's good example. And speaking of a good example, yeah, that's right, even the bad segues get callbacks. Godeater's Son serves as an example for all future Black Library novels in how to get a fall to chaos right. Though I'd argue this book has surpassed its predecessors, Noah clearly appreciates the influence of those earlier attempts. But come on, we all know the real reason you gave the Red Feast 5 stars. It's cause the Khorne also hate horses. Still, let's not get too far into a victory lap, because Heldenarr's character arc is not quite done. His broken body is reknitted by the Dark Powers, a magic upcycle to which Fall really brings the path. No more futile flailing against empowered beings, because now he's juiced to the gills with a forbidden supplement. And speaking of supplements, the tide of the battle is changed by Holland and Barrett. Tom and his warriors charge out of underground portals to slaughter Candip's forces, or, worse, tell them Bharati jokes. Against this backdrop, Fall discovers that third time's the charm when it comes to dueling his mum. Cause yeah, now he's got that unnatural strength and a cursed maw that opened up in his core, which unlocks a new style of abdominal crunches. He takes a moment to gloat about Saroy's corruption. After his own olive branch was refused, he's eager to destroy Ildred's faith in her Azerite allies. Alright, before Fall can put the eternal claim to the test, let's pause. As we know, Khorne loves a snazzy catchphrase, and it's tradition for a character to seal their new allegiance with the intonation of blood for the blood god. Since this moment happens in the climaxes of the 3 Khorne novels we've looked at, let's compare them. Yeah, we're doing an anatomy of a fall again.
Hey, Stir, are you gonna use that movie to make a wider point, or just do the same bit over and over?
What are you, new here? First up, the Red Feast. Sorry mate, I put you out my mind, kinda like you did with your family. The iconic slogan punctuates the moment Khorgus sheds his restraint and takes pleasure in killing. Fine, I don't want to repeat what I've said about pacing, let's just call this the standard version of the trope. Second up, Betrayer, where the line is, interestingly, not uttered by the person succumbing to chaos. In one of the ending's many, well, betrayals, Lorgar engineered Angron's enslavement to Khorne to save his life. Its esoteric naivety meets gruesome experimentation, like if Unit 731 dabbled in homeopathy. Crucially, the fact it's not Angron who says it emphasizes his tragic lack of agency. I've pointed out a few times that the coerced decisions of Betrayer's corruption arcs lack the accessible resonance of Godeater's Son, but that's okay, because they strengthen other themes Bowden wants to explore. Much of the novel, from Angron's unwilling transformation or the famous moment where Argol Tal argues that both sides are wrong, highlights the tragic inexorability of the heresy. If Godeater's Son is about a man's desperate struggle for agency, Betrayer is about men for whom agency was never even possible. I'm glad I can put a bow on my discussion of Betrayer, which is responsible for creating many of the motifs that Godeater's Son would later build on.
Impressive. Very nice.
Let's see Godeater's Son scene.
I named you for the glory of Sigmar, she said. Look at you. Look at what you became. Imagine what you could have been had you been with us. Khorne's curse filled my veins and fueled my rage, but I was still human beneath the hell. I sensed the regret tainting my mother's tone, the guilt. All this time she had sought to convince herself she'd done the right thing, leaving us. I hated Stormsworn, but I loved her too. The only way a man could deprived of his mother for so long. I could not blame her for what life had made her. She had become what she must, as I had. I raised my blade and said what she wanted to hear. Let Ildred think this was unavoidable. Let her think she had made the right choices. Because I forgave her. Blood for the blood god, I said.
Look at that deep emotion, the tasteful restraint. Oh my god, he's even disguising rebellion as submission. Nervan Wynn has done something surprising with Khorne's cheesiest catchphrase. He made it an act of compassion. Fool initially wanted to break Ildred's spirit, but instead chooses to alleviate her guilt by using the persona, the mask you might say, of an irredeemable monster.
So, you refuse to shake hands with me, eh?
Ever the refuser, his first vocalization of loyalty has the disloyal motive of absolving an enemy. You can also see it as a refutation of Fool's belief that he can accomplish noble ends through vicious means. He may think he's defying the dark gods by what lies in his heart, but he's still outwardly pursuing their interests, so what difference does it make? It's just cope. If there was more self-pity in his "I became what I must," it'd almost be like shooting and crying, the term coined for the non-apologetic apology of idea veterans who see themselves as victims of the brutality they were ordered to perpetrate. It should tell you something that previously the point of comparison was the colonial subject, and now it's the oppressor. In sum, we have three different contexts of Khorne's catchphrase. In the Red Feast, it's delivered in a straightforward manner to demonstrate the character's decision to serve chaos. Betrayer is our antithesis, with the phrase delivered by another character to denote a lack of agency in the decision. Godeater's son provides the synthesis. The character vocalizes his fealty while harboring traitorous ideals. Simultaneous submission and rebellion that gets at the cognitive dissonance of chaos. Sure, everyone else who worships chaos is a deluded slave, but I'm built different. I still have my secret feelings, so I still have agency. S to D, but not for me. We get another example of Fool weaponizing love later on when Khadra returns to, what else, ambush him as part of their final combat trial. We've had more final trials than most important elections of our lifetime. Empowered Fool makes a much stronger opponent than she's faced previously, but he still needs to do something unexpected to gain the edge, which he accomplishes with a kiss. Through the mask as well. Gotta stay safe from Nurgle's gifts. Side note, something I barely mentioned is the use of masks as a motif. There's a lot in there. From the way it factors into Urdo national traditions, when Juja co-opts Fool's legacy, he does so with a counterfeit Godeater's mask of his own. Thus, the symbol he constructed gets twisted towards revanchism. Added to that, you have Fool dueling his reforged mother, while wearing her husband's, his father's burial mask. That's so Freudian even Slaanesh won't touch it. And of course, there's the classic paradox of the disguise that reveals the true self, with Silas's posthumous gift being a mask of living metal that comes to resemble his own face, which I didn't finish drawing because I'm lazy. It's with this mask that Fool kisses Khadra. Now there are a couple of reasons I can imagine someone disliking the kiss. Maybe you prefer their relationship remaining platonic, or you're uncomfortable with the aggression, undoubtedly inappropriate behaviour even in a chaos workplace. Still, let me outline how it plays into the core themes. Khadra and Fool's relationship is built on violence. Fighting side by side while knowing there was always an inevitable future resumption of hostilities. The previous time she tried to kill Fool was due to him showing mercy to his free Gilder brother, and it was only Silas's unfortunate demise that stopped her. For all of her caddy the baddie bluster, it's clear she harbours some affectionate feelings towards her comrades. So, although it also precipitated a fight to the death, there's a fundamental instinct in both of them to chafe against Godeater's dispassionate view of people as skulls or skull takers. And that's what the kiss is, a defiance of Chaos's arbitrary injunction. Of course, this expression of humanity and connection is also a weaponization of love. Weapons are the only things these broken people understand. And it's also telling that it's an assertion of power over another. Fool may have been right to chafe against powerlessness, but his conception of power was always individualistic, a vision of personal agency to the detriment of others. With a bit more solidarity, he might not have ended up a slave to darkness saddled with double dental bills. And lack of solidarity really is the name of the game, because the defeat of Candip does not bring peace to his Erden kin. Many of the impoverished reclaimed still believe in Sigmar, just as his sister had, but they hadn't fought at his side, so Fall offers them neither mercy nor protection, just the power of a choice, the only thing a mortal could ever have. What happened to liberation? It's like Harvey Dent says, you either shit or live long enough to get the morpot. Fall sees Leland Soroy defenestrated and humbled. The dreams of a pre-Blood Binge Boskin come true. He leaves the former regent to die in the desert. If you'll forgive the pun, and why would you start now? It's a much colder method of murder than his fiery fury at Eleni's request for refreshment. That was back when he was one of the oppressed, so the attack had a certain punitive catharsis. Now he's an oppressor, perpetuating the same cycles of coercion he was subjected to because he has come to believe survival depends on throwing your lot in with one of the great powers. Fall may have chosen wrong, but as Argoltal says in Betrayer, both sides are wrong. Let's listen to another tragic resolution that hammers this home.
I would never again see the people I wished to most. Vari was gone wherever death had taken her. Jujar had sold his honor, then his life. Often I saw Iron in my dreams, laughing with kin in distant deserts, an infant mewling at her breast. I dreamt she died of old age in her sleep, unremembered but unhaunted. And when the Oshara Warborn brought tidings they had hunted down the Hullet and murdered them to the last, I pretended that, too, was only a dream.
Oh, what a deliciously bitter note. Alone among his comrades, Iron had the capacity to step away from the path of self-destruction. But sometimes the emotionally healthy decision isn't necessarily the safest one. In the end, the path to glory did protect her people, and putting aside the violence led to their death. It makes me think of how the least quote-unquote authoritarian socialist projects have been crushed by counter-revolutionaries, leaving only those states which adopt a siege mentality. So, with Fall's war won and his soul sold, the story concludes on one last epilogue twist. Newfound knowledge of Godeater flips the dynamic between Khadra and Fall. He teaches her something about their patron that will resolve the dissonance she felt after visiting the Realm of Skulls. Dude, I know she's a thematic parallel to your mum, but you don't have to keep bringing it up. Alright, so, the Godeater that granted him demonic power is not Khorne, but Archaon. That's right, the Khorne video wasn't even about Khorne, and I guess that twist means it's a Tzeentch video. I've talked about how this story has several fun reveals which are perhaps a little over foreshadowed, but still fulfill the most important role of a twist, that it changed the story in a meaningful way. For me, this one manages a full scorecard, sufficiently set up while being a surprise and, crucially, represents the final cruel kick in the ribs for Fall's doomed struggle for agency. You see, Archaon's backstory is that he grew up a zealous worshipper of Sigmar, only to be confronted with a prophecy that stated he would become the Everchosen. He sought divine aid from Sigmar, but gets left on red, and deals with that snub worse than pretty much anyone. Their starting points are different, a pious worshipper versus a rebellious cynic, but both bristle against the chaos corruption that seems foisted upon them. And for both, it's an existential crisis of helplessness that breaks their will. What comes next is grudging acceptance, with an emphasis on grudge. Just as Archaon aspires towards becoming the Godeater Khadra believes him to be, just as Mir wants to kill Khorne, Fall views the Everchosen as the architect of his descent, and seeks revenge for the control that was stolen from him. The cycle continues. The hurt done to me, I inflict upon another. They puts it down, I picks it back up. Okay, that thematic parallel is all well and good, but is there even a single red centurion of it mentioned in this book? Nope. So the reveal is much less meaningful to anyone who didn't do the further reading. No one told them it would count to the final grade. For all its flourish, Godeater's Son is still a Black Library book, so every now and then you get hit with a reminder that it's here to sell toys.
Cerveza cristal. Cerveza cristal.
And sure, while the novel tells us nothing about Archaon's origin or overall deal, he is the main antagonist of the setting. So as far as epilogues go, it's hardly as bad as Harry Styles wandering in as some guy you'd only know about if you read comics on microfiche. A friend theorizes that the tower Fall foresaw was double twist Be'lakor's, but I like that even less. He's another character with no prior connection to the story, only now without those thematic parallels. It's unfortunate that a book I'd like to recommend to AOS newbies ends on a beat that requires metatextual knowledge, but I think I've been fair to a novel I mostly like. And now a little celebration, because with chapter 45 dealt with, the story is officially Godeater's done. Okay, maybe that's not the right tone. How about... I suppose tonal issues are inevitable when spending 2 hours talking about the politics of toy soldier adventures. It's not uncommon to see similar deep dives for other types of nerd pulp, but even compared to properties like Doctor Who or Star Wars, Warhammer novels are just so brazenly subservient to the product. Despite all of that, and despite what I can only assume are bothersome corporate mandates and tight deadlines, a bunch of authors are even now slavishly wearing out their welcome at local cafes to produce stories that smug assholes like me will describe as good for a Black Library book. All this is to say that Godeater's Son is good in 72-point font, while For a Black Library book is like 8 point, okay, maybe 9. I almost hope GW doesn't commission a sequel that risks ruining the original. Though, if they do, a miniature tie-in would make that worth it. Think of the rules possibilities. Full only follows the player's orders on a 5+, while Kadara's missed attacks have a chance to disembowel the nearest friendly. Still, a 4+ ward save against models with the Legends keyword. What do you think, Rob? Worth their 300 points? Fuck it, bring on the sequel. I think Noah has earned a little faith in his ability to write a good Chaos story. I do hope he doesn't watch this video though. I doubt his process will be enriched by a lilac loser harping on about his vendetta against horses. In some online discussions I've come across, it seems that this book has gained the reputation as the one what made AOS grimdark, which I think relies on inaccurate assumptions that the setting is breezy hope punk. There have been many AOS books which focus on ordinary people flailing at the bottom of the mortal realm's food chain, just as there have been those keen to explore moral and/or existential crises. Where Noah does go further than his predecessors is in representing Sigmarite power as corrupt and, well, colonial, which I would argue is a natural direction to take the existing lore conflict between Azerites and the Reclaim. Obviously, there's a risk of going too far with that. Few who appreciate this fantasy world of diverse cities want it to start copying from its older sibling's slur-filled notebook. I guess that's why Candip has the deniability of being separate from Sigmar's official domain. Real Sigmarxism has never been tried. And this takes us back to the concerns of the Chaos Warrior I posed 2 hours ago, or however many household chores it took for you to get here. Firstly, Chaos is the primary locus of resistance against the Imperium/Sigmarite status quo, and it's also an ideologically hollow individualistic death cult. Does the reactionary hollowness of Chaos implicitly justify the excesses of the protagonist faction? Now, at the same time, the horror of Chaos creates a barrier to empathy. Most of us aren't automatically on board with the idea of selling your soul to demons. We didn't all go to the Bullingdon Club. Can a Chaos corruption arc be emotionally convincing, or perhaps even relatable? Let's hope so, because it's essential for the logic of the setting. Okay, let's tackle the first one. Godeater's Son is the story of someone whose corruption is rooted in their material conditions. Ildred openly acknowledges the role that poverty and discrimination play in fomenting chaos. However, even with his sympathetic beginnings, Falls' lumpen cause lacks ideological or ethical consistency from the start. Rage is not simply what incites the movement, but represents its guiding light, or well, guiding darkness. This lack of concrete principle means his followers see their own ideals reflected in his cause and try to wrestle the momentum towards their ambitions, such as self-enrichment, nationalist revanchism, a transactional chaos worship, or the sincere kind. Fall claims to fight for freedom, but he's mainly concerned with his own agency. When his contrarian reluctance to submit to the gods finally falters, there's almost nothing liberatory left for Chaos to subvert. This arc could be read conservatively, that it shows us the tyranny of revolution, how national liberation turns into revanchist barbarity, especially when we consider that moment during the first Sack of Candip that might as well be a reactionary caricature of People's War. But the story isn't prescriptive, so there's an equally valid interpretation that it shows how a People's War could have worked had it not been for the moral corruption of its leaders. As for the question of an emotionally compelling reason to turn to chaos, I'd say this does it better than any Black Library novel I've read. It does have the advantage of focusing on an ordinary mortal, unlike its Horus Heresy peers, but that's underselling how effective the principal arc is. Actually, the book's secret weapon is a well-utilised supporting cast. These characters act as vehicles for various philosophical positions, playing off Fool and each other in ways which clarify the core themes, yet it never feels contrived. For all the different ideas their arcs explore, there's a consistent through line of their bonds of fellowship and love straining against the misanthropic injunctions of chaos. The question of how do you make a fall to chaos emotionally convincing turns out to have a weirdly simple answer, by dramatising a person's struggle to maintain the relationships that make them human. I bet you didn't expect a Khorne video to be this corny. That's the last of those, by the way. Okay, that wraps up my original questions, but this book has raised a few of its own. As we know, The Pale of Bodchi was written as an intentional cultural pastiche of Afghanistan, and obviously there's a problematic dimension to that, especially now that Candip has been destroyed by chaos. Here's an AOS lore post that spells it out. The indigenous characters defeat their Western-coded oppressors, this is their god, by becoming devil-worshipping cannibals. It unintentionally embodies old colonial ideas about native peoples. For all the humanity and nuance that Noah injects into his characters, I can understand someone thinking that the story was undermined from the start by his choice of cultural pastiche. Damn it, this is why I didn't want to talk about pastiche. The satire video already used up my lifetime quota. But the point of that video was to distinguish between pastiche, references made without an underlying purpose, and satire, using allegory to communicate a coherent critique. I wouldn't be doing It wouldn't be thorough of me if I didn't explore the allegorical aspects of the text, even when they are problematic. And I'm not talking here about the unwitting recreation of reactionary stereotypes. It's definitely unfortunate. But then many of you will be 40k fans, and accidental right-wing parables fill that setting like argon in a double-glazed window, so I don't resent it when people want to pull down the blinds. Well, not too much, anyway. No, I want to delve into more specific preoccupations, such as certain occupations.
I previously served in the Marine Corps, and so I'd previously been on a deployment in Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's time for this video to jump the Alapex and see how deep the Afghanistan allegory might go. I've already outlined the limitations of applying anti-colonial themes to fantasy fiction. Chaos is not at all like local superstition. It's an external power that warps a culture's existing institutions to its own ends. Remember how, in Barat, the pillars of Urdaval were subverted by chaos towards self-destruction. Bear in mind that Urdaval is based on Pashtun Wali, so when we look at Taliban founder Muhammad Omar invoking the Pashto asylum principle to protect Osama bin Laden, a former proxy fighter for an external power. Yeah, see, we're getting into problematic territory, aren't we? Because while I'd never compare chaos to either indigenous traditions or an institutional religion, there is a parallel in the way the US used fundamentalism for anti-communist aims. I'm thinking of how the CIA supported reactionary fundamentalists in Afghanistan. Operation Cyclone, years before Soviet intervention. It'd take too long to go into all the covert shit. Let me just give you one example that stuck with me. USAID spent $60 million to produce children's textbooks for refugees which taught that jihad was mandatory and explained maths using guns and other weapons. This was part of America's ongoing efforts to solidify the links between violence and religion, influencing the generation who would grow up to form the Taliban. The insidious plan to spread chaos, with a small c, in the region, it worked a little too well, didn't it? I'm sure that if we get more of Heldenarr Falls, we'll see his shaky relationship with his chaos patron rupture, just as it did between the US and the Mujahideen. If the CIA is chaos, it's actually kind of funny how easily the rest of the 80s analogy slides into place. The ethnically diverse peoples of Afghanistan are the oppressed folk of Bodchi, while the inter-Sigmarite conflict that surprised Fall maps onto the division between Hafizullah Amin's administration and the USSR. Soviet officials disapproved of Amin's brutal coup. Indeed, some thought he was creating the conditions for the fundamentalist reaction the US was exploiting. Sound familiar? And sure, full views Sir Roy as an outsider, despite her being of Axian heritage, but in a similar way Amin studied in the United States, where he gave his future comrades reason to suspect a relationship with the CIA. So, just as with Hammerhall's Dawnbringer intervention, the Soviets sought to quell both the fundamentalist rebels as well as a leader whose policies, unwittingly, or perhaps even directly, serve the interests of the great enemy. Okay, I've compared Stormcast Eternals to both liberals and socialists, thus annoying all possible combinations of Sigmarxism poster. There we have it, two problematic readings of the Afghan stuff. Cultural pastiche that accidentally recreates colonial stereotypes, and a direct allegory for Afghanistan that criticises US foreign policy. Don't let the fact I'm mentioning them here in the final section fool you into assuming their importance. I just had to arrive at the ending for either to make sense. I don't think they're much more than unintentional thematic satellites orbiting around what seems to be the story's core concern, colonialism and its psychological effects. Ah, here we go. Noah did a Reddit AMA. I guess we can settle the debate. Go on, tell them I'm right.
To be honest, I wasn't thinking about colonialism as a concept when I wrote that novel. The power dynamics are more based on my own observations between foreigners/natives in Afghanistan and then in Vietnam when I was a little older.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Alright, I'm not saying that this one Reddit comment inherently disproves my interpretation of the text. I don't think I need to explain Death of the Author, when 5 years ago that's what every second video essay was about. Now they've all moved on to videos about AI, another sort of Death of the Author. With all that said, I think it's worth trying to reconcile this statement with a story that I, and clearly some others, would argue features colonial dynamics. A conspiracy-minded person might suggest that Noah played down the politics of his work. In what are now deleted tweets, former Black Library author Thomas Parrott suggested his termination was due to management being angry about his criticism of the fascist element of the fanbase, as well as other political interpretations of the law. Based on that, it seems prudent not to come off too lefty if you want to keep your job, and perhaps Noah is doing just that. So, is he a closet Maoist? Have we finally found out the identity of Jay Sakai? I thought that was worth mentioning, but I don't really buy it. No, I assume Noah's being honest about his intent to riff on the power dynamics between foreigners and locals he observed in Afghanistan and Vietnam. You know what I notice? Both nations have lengthy histories in resisting colonial domination. Vietnam was able to secure its post-colonial independence through a successful People's War, while Afghanistan's dysfunctional socialism was overthrown by US-funded reactionaries. It's clear that the repercussions of colonialism reverberate to this day, which we might call neo-colonialism, and this would be especially visible in the dynamic between locals and foreigners coming from the First World, countries that built much of their wealth through colonial exploitation. Thing is, when you apply a modern, neo-colonial dynamic to a fantasy setting that plays with an early capitalist mode of production, complete with the indentured servitude that you saw in the settler frontier of the Americas, you've sort of dropped the neo, haven't you? And so, bearing in mind the history of colonialism fueling capitalist development, consider the fact that Godeater's son escalates the existing law tension between the Reclaimed and Azerites, a conflict which already has a built-in settler colonial interpretation. In sum, whether or not Noah intended to represent colonialism, both the real-world observations and the AOS law he's riffing on, especially when combined, are predisposed to that reading. Oh, and one further thing about the realms reclaimed. Though the dynamic readily maps onto colonial themes, it's also a little different, since these people are returning to the lands their ancestors fled as refugees. Settler colonialism is usually undertaken by foreigners, not the descendants of those who left many centuries ago, only to return and oppress the native population that stayed behind, right? Right? Oh. I really didn't know how to talk about this. I wrote, recorded and deleted a whole section about this unintended parallel, down to the fact that Sister Eleni has a whole rant about how they made the desert blue, a common justification of Zionism. I started prepping this project last year, and since then I've been wondering which is weirder, mention an ongoing genocide in a video about a fantasy wargame that risks trivialization, or talk about anti-colonial themes without mentioning Palestine, which would deliberately obfuscate today's most violent frontier of settler colonialism. With all that in mind, I'll leave you with one more observation about Godeater's son. More than anything else, Heldenarr Falls chafed against the curtailment of his agency, and feeling unable to affect the cruelty of the world is what drove drove him to evil. For many of us in Western countries, it's hard not to feel similarly powerless when faced with an unwaveringly pro-Israel establishment.
I'm very clear. Israel must have that, does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Sakir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right.
Britain's next Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. At least he's equal opportunities when it comes to hungry children, but our ruling class is not magical. If the establishment didn't need our consent, it wouldn't bother manufacturing it. And we've seen lots of laudable organising in solidarity with Palestine. The UK and US will shortly be holding elections, in which Liberals will try to guilt you into supporting their camp on the basis that they're slightly less bloodthirsty than the competition. As I finish this video, Labour is keen to applaud it for doing less than the bare minimum, while keeping to their only real foreign policy principle, following the United States. In the face of hawkish Liberals demanding your affections, your vote, I would remind you that you have the power to refuse. Now that the mood is suitably dour, I just thought I'd say, if you like this video, consider supporting me on Patreon. Full transparency, my future content plans are not just Warhammer, so only back the channel if you're cool with me tackling a variety of subjects. Politics, history, movies, or whatever. A year back, I was toying with the idea of abandoning the Warhammer content completely in favour of another project, but the words of some kind folks convinced me to resume this. So, thank you. Consider this a new beginning for the channel. I guess you could call it a new Sternrise. Nailed it. Hope you enjoyed the video, because it literally took over 6 months to make. Maybe I should have sat on multiple finished videos before I started uploading again, like when Rogue Hobbies launched the channel. But I'm no Rogue Hobbies, you can't expect that level of quality from me, and you can tell that just by looking at our Zinchcats. Since you all sat through the muddy pitch, I feel obliged to give you another hot take. Well, how about this? 40k should have never added chaos. Obviously, that ship has sailed, sunk, and joined a Deepkin army, but indulge the counterfactual for a sec. The main draw of the setting, the genetically engineered super soldiers, make the path to glory less universal than it is in fantasy. Also, the Imperium's fascism is implicitly justified by, the literal forces of hell. You could still have a Horus Heresy-sized conflict between Imperium loyalists and traitors, only now there has to be more of an ideological underpinning than, because an evil sword told me so. And hey, if the primary movement of defection is not to chaos but a politically distinct human or maybe even Xenos faction, that's an opportunity to further explore the efficacy of the Imperium's xenophobia. Anyway, that's just a little bit of bait at the end. I know, I've taken a few swipes at 40k, but in complete fairness, it wouldn't be a Khorne video without an axe to grind. You might wonder why I chose to run one film pun into the ground when Full is such fertile soil for wordplay. We could have had Full Metal Jacket, Full the President's Men, Faulty Towers. Why Anatomy of a Fall? Okay, so on one level this video is literally an anatomy of a fall to chaos, but what's the relevance past that? You know what? I don't know. I'm not sure what it is about a failed creative facing violent retribution for their annoying repetition that speaks to me.
Wait, Stir, isn't that just a version of the hack wife hates nerd husband joke?